Hello there, and welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you found your way here today. Tonight we're going to slow down together and explore something that lives inside every one of us, quietly shaping how we feel, how we love, how we rest, and how we wake. It moves through the blood without a sound, yet it decides so much of what a single day feels like. We call it the world of hormones, and it is far stranger, older, and gentler than most people ever realize. There is no need to remember anything, no need to follow closely. You can simply let the words settle over you like a soft blanket, while your body in its own quiet way continues doing exactly what it has always known how to do. And before we begin, if you enjoy what I share here, please leave a like and hit subscribe. It's how others find their way to this little corner too. Now let's begin. The word hormone was born from a Greek term hormon, which simply means to set in motion. A physiologist named Ernest Starling first used it in 1905, searching for a way to describe something entirely new to science, a chemical messenger that could travel through the blood and instruct a distant organ without any nerve ever carrying the signal. Before that moment, the body's communication was thought to run only along nerves, wire by wire, like a telephone switchboard. But Starling and his colleague William Bayliss had just discovered something quieter. They found that the small intestine, when it sensed acid arriving from the stomach, released a substance into the bloodstream that traveled to the pancreas and told it gently to begin its work. No nerve carried that message. Blood did. It was the body's first known example of a chemical letter sealed and sent, trusting that the right organ would open it at the right time. Have you ever wondered how one part of your body seems to simply know what another part needs without you ever thinking about it consciously? This is part of the answer. Long before the word existed, the process itself had already been running quietly inside every living creature, with a bloodstream, animals and humans alike, for hundreds of millions of years. Starling only gave a name to something ancient. And so, in a very real sense, tonight's subject predates language itself, predates thought, predates almost everything we consider modern about the mind. It is simply motion, set gently into the blood, over and over every single day of a life. Picture a single molecule so small that millions of them could fit on the head of a pin, drifting through the bloodstream until it finds the one cell built to recognize it. That cell is waiting its surface, covered in receptors shaped to fit that molecule and almost nothing else, the way a lock waits for one particular key. The moment the molecule docks onto its receptor, something remarkable happens inside the cell. Not slowly, not over minutes, but within a matter of seconds. A cascade begins. Proteins shift shape channels, open signals multiply from one molecule into thousands of internal messages, all sparked by that first tiny arrival. This is how adrenaline can make a heart pound almost the instant danger appears, and how a certain scent can quietly shift a mood before a single conscious thought forms. The body does not wait for permission. It reacts chemically at a speed that feels almost instantaneous to the person experiencing it. What makes this especially quiet and remarkable is the sheer efficiency involved. One molecule can awaken a response in a single cell, and that cell can influence thousands more nearby, all without a single nerve impulse required. It is chemistry behaving like conversation, brief and precise. You have felt this before, most likely today, though you may not have noticed it happening. A sudden flush of warmth, a small jolt of alertness, a wave of calm after a deep breath. Each of these can trace itself back to a single molecule, finding its single waiting receptor, and choosing in that instant to speak. There is something quietly poetic about the way hormones travel. A hormone is made in one place, often a small, unremarkable gland, tucked deep inside the body, and yet it acts far away in an organ that may sit on the completely opposite side of the body entirely. The thyroid, resting gently at the base of the throat, releases a hormone that reaches into muscles, into the heart, into the very cells of the skin. The pituitary gland, hidden behind the eyes, and no larger than a small grape, sends instructions all the way down to the ovaries or the testes, coordinating processes it will never directly touch. This is the essence of the endocrine system. Distance is no obstacle at all. Unlike the nervous system, which relies on a direct wire from one point to another, the endocrine system releases its messages into the bloodstream and trusts the current to carry them wherever they are needed. It is less like a phone call and more like a letter dropped into a vast moving river, addressed with such precision that it always reaches the right shore. Every gland has its own particular language, its own particular audience, spread throughout the body in ways that would take a map to fully trace. And beneath all of this quiet distance and travel lies a kind of trust built into biology itself, that the message sent will be the message received. Cell recognizing hormone, hormone recognizing cell, again and again, without a single mistake, most days of a person's life. Imagine for a moment the brain noticing something unexpected. A sudden loud sound, a shadow moving where nothing should move. That noticing happens within a fraction of a second, and almost as quickly a small structure deep in the brain sends an urgent signal downward toward the adrenal glands sitting just above each kidney. Those glands, in turn, respond by releasing adrenaline directly into the bloodstream, and within moments, that adrenaline has reached the heart, the lungs, and the muscles, preparing the entire body to act before a person has even consciously understood what triggered the alarm. The heart begins to beat faster. The lungs open wider to take in more air. Blood is redirected away from digestion and toward the arms and legs where it might be needed most. All of this unfolds automatically, without thought, in the span of just a few heartbeats. It is easy to assume this response only belongs to true emergencies, but it activates far more often than most people realize. A near miss in traffic, a sudden message from a boss, an unexpected knock at the door late at night. Each of these can trigger the very same flood of adrenaline that once helped early humans survive genuine physical danger. The body, in other words, cannot always tell the difference between a real threat and a startling surprise. It simply responds the way it always has, quickly and completely, trusting that speed matters more than precision in that very first moment. Only afterward, once the danger has passed or proven harmless, does the body begin the slower work of settling back down again. There is a hormone that seems to respond less to danger and more to closeness, and its name is oxytocin. It rises during a hug, even a brief one. It rises when two hands meet and hold each other, whether in comfort or in quiet companionship. It rises too in something as simple as a warm, sustained gaze between two people who trust each other. Each of these moments are so ordinary that they rarely feel scientific, is quietly chemical underneath the surface. You may have felt this yourself, without ever naming it, that particular ease that settles in after a long embrace, or the way a familiar hand in yours can make a crowded room feel smaller and safer. That feeling has a name and a source, and it is happening inside you more often than you might expect. Oxytocin was first studied for its role in childbirth and breastfeeding, where it helps trigger contractions and supports the flow of milk. But researchers eventually noticed it appearing in far gentler circumstances as well, in friendships, in quiet companionship between strangers, even in the presence of a trusted animal. It does not require grand gestures. A small, sincere touch is often enough. This is perhaps one of the more comforting truths about the body, that connection itself, plain and ordinary connection, is not just an emotional experience, but a biological one, chemically woven into the same systems that govern heart rate and digestion and sleep. Closeness, in other words, is never only in the mind. It lives quite literally in the blood as well, one gentle rise at a time. Cortisol is often described as a stress hormone, and while that description is not wrong, it is incomplete, because cortisol also plays a quiet, essential role every single morning, whether or not any stress is present at all. In most people, cortisol levels rise sharply within the first half hour after waking, reaching a natural peak that helps the body transition out of sleep and into alertness. This is sometimes called the cortisol awakening response, and it happens largely without conscious effort, triggered by light entering the eyes and by the body's own internal clock anticipating the start of a new day. Without this morning rise, waking up would likely feel far heavier, far slower, as though the body had not yet received permission to begin. After this peak, cortisol does not stay high. It begins a slow, steady decline throughout the day, gradually easing as evening approaches, making space for other hormones to take over as the body prepares for rest instead of activity. This rhythm repeats day after day, largely independent of what actually happens during that day, though genuine stress can certainly add extra spikes on top of it. What makes this particular rhythm so remarkable is its reliability. Even in the absence of sunlight, even in unusual schedules, the body still attempts to produce this same morning rise, as though some internal sense of time continues counting regardless of circumstances. It is one of the clearest examples of how deeply hormonal rhythms are woven into something as simple and as universal as the daily act of waking up. A small gland, deep within the brain, no larger than a grain of rice, begins its work each evening, almost the moment darkness arrives. This is the pineal gland, and the hormone it produces, melatonin, is often thought of simply as the sleep hormone, though its true role is a little more precise than that. Melatonin does not force sleep to happen. Instead, it signals to the rest of the body that night has arrived gently, lowering body temperature and easing the systems that keep a person alert during the day. For most of human history, this signal followed the sun with remarkable simplicity, rising with darkness and fading with dawn. One might assume then that modern light bulbs would be the main disruption to this ancient rhythm, and to some degree they are. But the more significant disruption comes from something smaller and closer, held in the hand almost every evening. Blue light, the particular wavelength emitted strongly by phone and computer screens, is especially effective at suppressing melatonin production, even at a brightness that feels comfortable and unremarkable to the eyes. A glowing screen can convince the brain that daylight has not yet ended, delaying the rise of melatonin by an hour or more in some people. This does not mean screens are harmful in every sense, only that they speak quite literally the wrong language to a gland that has spent millions of years listening for darkness. Understanding this rhythm offers a quiet kind of reassurance. A reminder that the body is always listening to its environment, waiting patiently for the signal that finally says gently, it is safe now to rest. At the very center of the skull, cradled in a small bony hollow just behind the eyes, sits a gland no larger than a pea. Despite its size, it carries a title unlike any other gland in the body, the master gland. The pituitary earns this name because it does not simply produce hormones for its own purpose. Instead, it produces hormones whose entire job is to instruct other glands, telling the thyroid when to speed up, telling the adrenal glands when to respond, telling the ovaries or testes when to begin certain seasonal or monthly changes. It behaves less like a worker and more like a quiet conductor standing at the front of an orchestra it never touches directly, yet somehow shaping every note that follows. This small gland receives its own instructions in turn from a nearby structure called the hypothalamus, which links the nervous system to the entire hormonal world. Together they form a kind of command center, so small that both structures combined could rest easily in the palm of one hand, and yet so influential that a disruption in either one can ripple outward into nearly every system the body relies on. It is a strange kind of power, held not through size or strength, but through precise, well-timed communication. Perhaps there is something worth noticing in that alone, the reminder that influence rarely needs to be large to matter. Sometimes the smallest, quietest structures are the ones truly holding a much larger system, gently together, coordinating it patiently. one small signal at a time every hour of every day. For centuries, a diagnosis that today is manageable once meant something closer to a slow, certain decline. Before 1922, a person with severe diabetes had very few options, and doctors could do little more than watch the condition progress. Everything changed when a small team of researchers in Canada, led by Frederick Banting and Charles Best, successfully extracted insulin and used it to treat a 14-year-old boy named Leonard Thompson who was gravely ill. Within days, his condition began to improve, and what had once seemed inevitable no longer was. This moment marked one of the earliest instances of a hormone being isolated, purified, and given back to a body that could no longer produce enough of it on its own. It was not simply a medical breakthrough. It was proof of a much larger idea that hormones themselves could be understood well enough to be replicated, measured, and administered with real precision. Before this, hormones were mysterious substances sensed only through their effects. After this, they became something science could actually hold, study, and eventually manufacture. The discovery reshaped how doctors understood countless other conditions, as well opening the door to treatments for thyroid disorders, growth conditions, and hormonal imbalances of every kind. What began with one very sick teenager in a hospital in Toronto quietly became one of the most significant turning points in the entire history of medicine. It is worth pausing on that just for a moment. The idea that understanding something as small and invisible as a hormone could change the entire course of human survival. There is a common misconception, worth gently setting aside the idea, that testosterone belongs only to men and estrogen only to women. In truth, both hormones exist in every human body, produced continuously throughout life, though typically in different proportions depending on a person's biology. Testosterone is produced not only in the testes, but also in smaller amounts, in the ovaries and adrenal glands. Estrogen, likewise, is produced in the ovaries, but also in smaller quantities by the testes and other tissues throughout the body. What differs most between individuals is not the presence of these hormones, but their relative balance, a ratio that shifts across a lifetime, from childhood, through puberty, through adulthood, and eventually into older age. These two hormones influence far more than reproduction alone. Testosterone plays a role in bone density, muscle maintenance, and even certain aspects of mood regulation in every body that produces it. Estrogen similarly supports bone strength, cardiovascular health, and skin elasticity, again, in every body that produces it, regardless of how much. Rather than existing as two separate, opposing forces, they function more like two instruments, playing within the same quiet orchestra, each present, each necessary, simply tuned differently depending on the individual. This shared presence is a small but meaningful reminder of how much biology tends to favor overlap rather than strict separation. The body rarely deals in absolutes. Instead, it deals in balance, proportion, and gradual change, a theme that will continue to echo throughout nearly every hormone this evening. One of the more curious discoveries about dopamine is that it does not simply arrive after something good happens. More often, it rises beforehand in the quiet space of anticipation. Researchers studying this pattern found that dopamine levels increase noticeably when an animal expects a reward is coming, sometimes even more sharply than when the reward actually arrives. This means that dopamine is not purely a chemical of pleasure, as it is so often described, but rather a chemical of expectation, of wanting, of the mind reaching slightly ahead of the present moment. Consider the quiet thrill of waiting for a message from someone important, or the small flutter felt while a favorite song builds toward its chorus. That sensation, that lean forward feeling, is largely dopamine at work, active before the outcome has even been decided. This anticipatory rise likely evolved as a kind of internal motivator, encouraging early humans to keep pursuing food safety or connection, rather than waiting passively for rewards to simply appear. It kept effort moving forward, one hopeful step at a time. Interestingly, if the expected reward fails to arrive, dopamine can drop below its usual baseline, which may explain why disappointment often feels sharper than simple neutrality. There is something oddly comforting in understanding this pattern, though. It suggests that so much of what feels exciting in daily life, small hopes, quiet expectations, gentle plans for tomorrow, is not incidental to the mind. It is, in a very real sense, chemically built into how the brain moves forward through time. Serotonin is often introduced as a hormone of the mind, tied closely to mood, calmness, and emotional balance. And that description is accurate as far as it goes. What surprises many people, though, is learning where most of it actually comes from. The majority of the body's serotonin, by a wide margin, is produced not in the brain at all, but deep within the digestive system, inside the walls of the gut. There it plays a very different role, helping to regulate digestion movement within the intestines and communication between the gut and the rest of the body. This means the gut and the brain are far more connected than most people realize, linked by shared chemistry rather than simple coincidence. Researchers sometimes refer to this connection as the gut-brain relationship, a quiet, ongoing conversation carried out largely outside of conscious awareness. It may help explain why certain feelings, unease, comfort, even a vague sense of calm, can sometimes be felt physically within the stomach before they are ever felt as clear emotions in the mind. The version of serotonin found in the brain does not simply travel down from the gut, since a protective barrier separates the two systems fairly strictly. Instead, the brain produces its own smaller, separate supply. Still, the two systems appear to influence one another through nerves, through other chemical signals, through a relationship science is still working to fully understand. It is a gentle reminder that the body rarely keeps its systems in isolation. Even mood, something that feels so purely mental, has roots reaching quietly into the stomach as well. Growth hormone does not flow through the body in a steady, constant stream. Instead, it arrives in short, deliberate pulses, rising sharply and then fading again over and over throughout a single day. Of all these pulses, the largest and most significant one typically arrives not during activity or exercise, but during deep sleep, usually within the first few hours after falling asleep. This is the stage of sleep sometimes called slow-wave sleep, where brain activity slows and the body turns much of its attention toward repair. During this particular window, growth hormone supports the rebuilding of muscle tissue, the strengthening of bone, and the general maintenance of cells throughout the body. This is part of why deep, uninterrupted sleep feels so different from light, restless sleep, even if the total number of hours spent asleep seems similar. The body is not simply resting during this time. It is quietly working, repairing small amounts of daily wear before the next day begins again. In children and teenagers, this nightly pulse plays an especially important role, contributing directly to physical growth over months and years. In adults, its role shifts slightly, focusing less on growth itself and more on maintenance, tissue repair, and metabolic balance. Either way, the pattern remains the same, a quiet reminder that some of the body's most important work does not happen while a person is awake and active, but while they are still unaware and deeply asleep. Perhaps there is comfort in that, knowing that stillness itself is doing something. The word endorphin carries its own quiet history within it, formed from two ideas combined together: endogenous, meaning made within the body, and morphine, the well-known pain-relieving compound. This name was chosen deliberately because researchers discovered that endorphins act on the very same receptors in the brain that morphine does, producing a similar natural pain-relieving effect, without any external substance required. In other words, the body has always carried its own built-in system for easing pain, long before any medicine existed to do the same job artificially. Endorphins tend to rise during moments of physical exertion, during long periods of laughter, and notably, during moments of real physical pain itself, almost as though the body anticipates that comfort will be needed and begins preparing it in advance. This may explain the curious sensation athletes sometimes describe after prolonged effort, a feeling of calm or mild euphoria arriving once real physical strain has passed. It is the body's own quiet reward for enduring something difficult. Unlike morphine, though, endorphins are tightly regulated, rising and falling in careful proportion to what the body actually needs, without the risks that come from an external substance overriding that natural balance. This distinction matters. The body is not simply capable of surviving pain, it is capable of gently softening it as well, using tools it has carried internally the entire time. There is something quietly reassuring in this fact, a reminder that resilience is not only about strength, but also about a body's own built-in capacity for comfort, arriving exactly when it is needed most. Resting quietly at the base of the throat, shaped somewhat like a small butterfly, the thyroid gland performs one of the more remarkable balancing acts in the entire body. It produces hormones that determine in large part how quickly nearly every cell converts food and oxygen into usable energy, a process known as metabolism. When the thyroid produces slightly more of its hormone, cells throughout the body tend to work a little faster, heart rate rises slightly, body temperature edges upward, and energy is used a little more quickly. When it produces slightly less, the opposite occurs. Everything slows gently, sometimes so gradually that a person may not notice the shift until it becomes significant. This means a gland small enough to sit comfortably between two fingers is quietly setting the pace for how the entire body spends its energy, hour after hour, day after day. It does not work alone, of course. It receives its own instructions from the pituitary gland, which in turn listens to the hypothalamus, forming a chain of communication that constantly checks and adjusts itself, almost like a thermostat fine-tuning a room's temperature without anyone touching a dial. This is why thyroid imbalances can affect so many different parts of life at once: energy levels, body temperature, even mood. Since so many systems depend on the steady rhythm this small gland provides, it is easy to overlook something so small and unassuming, tucked quietly at the front of the neck. And yet its influence reaches into nearly every cell a person carries, working continuously, without ever asking for recognition. Hunger often feels like a simple, obvious sensation, a quiet growl, a slight emptiness, a pull toward the kitchen. Beneath that familiar feeling, though, lies a specific hormone working behind the scenes called ghrelin. Produced mainly in the stomach, ghrelin levels begin rising in the hours before a typical mealtime, climbing steadily until they reach a peak that the brain interprets as the unmistakable signal to eat. What makes ghrelin particularly interesting is how closely it follows habit rather than pure necessity. If a person eats lunch at the same time every day, ghrelin will often begin rising shortly before that familiar hour arrives, almost as though the body has learned to anticipate the meal in advance, regardless of how much energy is actually still available. This explains why hunger can sometimes feel surprisingly strong even shortly after a fairly substantial breakfast, if the body has simply grown accustomed to eating again soon after. Once food finally arrives, ghrelin levels begin to fall fairly quickly, easing that insistent familiar pull. Researchers have also found that poor sleep tends to elevate ghrelin the following day, which may help explain why tired mornings so often come paired with stronger cravings than well-rested ones. There is something quietly humbling in learning that something as ordinary as hunger, felt by every person alive multiple times a day, is guided by a hormone with its own careful rhythm, rising and falling in a pattern shaped by both biology and simple daily habit, working quietly without ever needing to be consciously noticed at all. In the 1950s, researchers noticed a peculiar strain of laboratory mice that seemed to eat constantly, gaining weight rapidly, no matter how much food was already available to them. For decades, the exact reason remained unclear until scientists eventually discovered that these particular mice were missing a crucial hormone, entirely one now known as leptin. Leptin is produced primarily by fat tissue itself, and its core function is to signal fullness to the brain, essentially telling the hypothalamus that enough energy has already been stored and eating can reasonably stop. In the mice missing this hormone, that signal simply never arrived, leaving them with no internal sense of having eaten enough regardless of how much food they consumed. When researchers eventually gave these mice supplemental leptin, something remarkable happened. Their appetite normalized almost immediately, and their weight began to stabilize. This discovery reshaped how scientists understood hunger and fullness entirely, revealing that appetite is not simply a matter of willpower or habit, but a carefully regulated hormonal system, one capable of malfunctioning in ways that have nothing to do with personal choice at all. In humans, leptin resistance, a condition where the brain no longer responds properly to leptin's signal, has since become an important area of ongoing research. It is a striking reminder that even something as personal and familiar as appetite is shaped by chemistry working quietly in the background. A signal sent from fat tissue to brain, asking gently again and again whether enough has finally been received. Resting directly atop each kidney, small and triangular in shape, sit the adrenal gland structures, easy to overlook yet essential to how the body responds to sudden stress. Each adrenal gland is actually built from two distinct parts, working together: an outer layer and an inner core, each responsible for producing different hormones with different timelines. The inner core produces adrenaline, offering an immediate, fast-acting response that arrives within seconds of a perceived threat. The outer layer, by contrast, produces cortisol, a hormone that builds more gradually and lingers longer, helping sustain the body's response if a stressful situation continues beyond just a few passing moments. Together, these two layers form a kind of two-part alarm system, one built for instant reaction, the other built for steady endurance. This division makes a great deal of sense when considered closely. A sudden danger requires an immediate burst of energy, a racing heart tensed, muscles heightened alertness, all of which adrenaline provides almost instantly. A prolonged challenge, however, whether physical or emotional, requires something more sustained. And this is where cortisol quietly takes over, helping regulate blood sugar, energy availability, and inflammation over a longer stretch of time. The adrenal glands, though small enough to rest easily in the palm of one hand combined, carry an outsized responsibility, standing ready at every moment, day and night, prepared to respond. The instant the brain signals that something requires attention, calm and quiet until they are needed, and remarkably fast once they are. Vasopressin is a hormone rarely discussed outside of certain medical conversations, and yet it performs a task the body depends on, constantly managing something as fundamental as water balance. Produced in the hypothalamus and released from the pituitary gland, vasopressin travels to the kidneys, where it essentially decides moment by moment how much water should be conserved and how much should be released as urine. When the body senses even a small degree of dehydration, perhaps after a warm day or a missed glass of water, vasopressin levels rise, signaling the kidneys to hold on to more water and produce less urine, helping protect the body's overall fluid balance. When the body has plenty of water available, vasopressin levels ease back, allowing excess fluid to be released more freely. This quiet regulation happens continuously without any conscious awareness at all, adjusting itself gradually throughout each day, depending on fluid intake, temperature, and activity level. Vasopressin is sometimes called the antidiuretic hormone, a name that simply reflects its core function, working against excessive water loss. Its influence reaches beyond hydration alone, playing a subtle role in blood pressure regulation, and even certain aspects of social behavior in ongoing research, though water balance remains its clearest and most essential responsibility. There is something quietly remarkable in realizing that something as basic as staying properly hydrated is not left to chance or memory alone, but is actively, continuously managed by a small hormone working in the background, adjusting itself constantly to keep the body in careful, steady balance. Despite the enormous variety of hormones circulating throughout the body, each one performing its own particular task, nearly all of them can be grouped into just three broad chemical families: steroid hormones, peptide hormones, and amine hormones. Steroid hormones, which include testosterone, estrogen, and cortisol, are built from cholesterol and share the useful ability to pass directly through a cell's outer membrane, allowing them to act more slowly, but often more thoroughly, sometimes influencing which genes a cell chooses to activate. Peptide hormones, which include insulin and growth hormone, are built instead from chains of amino acids, and because they cannot pass through a cell membrane as easily, they must bind to receptors on the outside of a cell, triggering a rapid chain reaction within, often producing very fast, short-lived effects. Amine hormones, a smaller family that includes adrenaline and melatonin, are built from single amino acids and tend to act quickly as well, often influencing alertness, mood, and the body's internal sense of day and night. This shared structure across such different hormones is not simply a coincidence. It reflects a kind of biological economy, where the body reuses a small handful of chemical blueprints again and again, adapting each one slightly to serve entirely different purposes. It is a quiet reminder that complexity does not always require an endless variety of building blocks. Sometimes, it only requires a few reliable patterns, repeated with just enough variation to create the extraordinary range of signals the body relies on every single day. To understand just how far a single hormone must travel, it helps to consider the scale of the pathway it moves through. If every blood vessel inside an adult human body, from the largest arteries to the smallest capillaries, were laid out in a single continuous line, the total distance would stretch to roughly 60,000 miles, more than twice the distance, around the entire planet. Every hormone released into the bloodstream enters this vast branching network, and somehow, despite its staggering size, still manages to find its intended destination with remarkable reliability. This is not because the body is searching randomly. Blood flow follows organized, predictable pathways, and receptors are positioned precisely where they are needed, allowing a hormone to be swept along by the natural current until it reaches tissue capable of recognizing it. Even so, the sheer scale involved is worth pausing on. A hormone released near the base of the brain may eventually reach a cell in the fingertip or the sole of the foot, carried the entire distance without ever losing its shape or its intended message along the way. This vast network operates continuously day and night, never fully resting, quietly carrying not just oxygen and nutrients, but instructions, messages, and signals that shape nearly every function the body performs. It is a strange kind of comfort knowing that somewhere inside right now, tiny messages are traveling great distances, faithfully, reliably, simply to make sure the right instruction reaches exactly the right place. Given the vast distance, a hormone must sometimes travel 60,000 miles of vessels branching throughout the entire body. One might expect the journey to take a considerable amount of time, and yet remarkably, a hormone can travel from the gland that produced it to the organ it is meant to influence in under a single minute, sometimes in only a matter of seconds. This speed is possible because the heart, tireless and rhythmic, pumps blood continuously through the body, completing a full circulation roughly once every minute during rest. Faster still during moments of activity or stress. A hormone released near the brain does not need to wait patiently for its own private pathway. It simply enters the bloodstream already in motion. carried forward by a current that never stops moving. This is part of why certain hormonal effects can feel almost immediate. A flush of warmth, a sudden alertness, a wave of unexpected calm arriving so quickly that it seems to bypass conscious thought altogether. The body in this sense behaves less like a series of separate systems and more like a single, continuously connected whole, where a signal released in one place can shape an experience felt somewhere else entirely within moments. There is something quietly remarkable in this efficiency, a reminder that despite the enormous scale of the human body, its internal communication remains fast, fluid, and constant, never idle, always circulating, always prepared to deliver its next quiet message, exactly where it is needed most. At any given moment, without any conscious effort or awareness, the adult body is producing and actively using dozens of distinct hormones, each one performing its own particular role, often simultaneously with several others. Some regulate metabolism, quietly determining how quickly energy is used throughout the day. Others regulate mood, appetite, sleep growth, temperature, and stress, often overlapping and interacting with one another in ways that are still not fully understood even by researchers who study them closely. This means that a single, ordinary day, one that might feel simple and uneventful on the surface, actually involves an extraordinarily complex internal choreography. Dozens of chemical messengers rising and falling in careful coordination, adjusting themselves constantly based on sleep, food, light temperature, and even emotional experience. No single hormone works entirely alone. Insulin depends on signals from the pancreas, which respond to signals from the gut, which respond to food itself, which is influenced by hormones like ghrelin and leptin regulating hunger in the first place. It is a system built not on isolated instructions, but on constant, layered conversation between dozens of moving parts. Considering this complexity, it becomes easier to understand why something as small as poor sleep, or as simple as skipping a meal, can ripple outward and affect so many seemingly unrelated aspects of daily life. The body is never handling just one task at a time. It is always managing dozens, quietly, continuously, all at once, without ever needing to be consciously directed to do so. Certain hormones exist within the body at concentrations so small that for much of scientific history, they were nearly impossible to measure with any real precision. Some circulate at levels equivalent to a single drop of dye dissolved into an entire swimming pool, a proportion so faint that early researchers could sense a hormone's effects long before they could actually detect the hormone itself directly. This presented a genuine challenge for decades, since understanding a hormone typically required first being able to measure it reliably. It was not until the development of highly sensitive laboratory techniques, particularly in the mid-20th century, that scientists finally gained the tools necessary to detect hormones at such remarkably faint concentrations. What makes this especially striking is how much influence these tiny amounts still manage to carry. A hormone does not need to be abundant to be powerful. It only needs to reach the right receptor on the right cell at the right moment. And even a vanishingly small concentration can trigger a response felt throughout the entire body. This challenges a fairly intuitive assumption, the idea that greater impact requires greater quantity. In the world of hormones, precision matters far more than volume. A single drop correctly placed can accomplish what an entire pool of the wrong substance never could. There is something quietly humbling in this idea, a reminder that influence is not always about how much of something exists, but about how precisely and how faithfully it manages to reach exactly where it is needed. Inside a single cell, an event that begins with just one hormone molecule rarely stays contained to just one reaction. Once that molecule binds to its receptor, it activates a process researchers often describe as signal amplification, where one small starting signal multiplies rapidly into many more internal signals, sometimes numbering in the thousands, all stemming from that single original arrival. This works somewhat like a single spoken word passed quietly through a large crowd where one sentence spreads outward, repeated and reinforced, until far more people have received the message than initially heard it directly. Inside the cell, this amplification often happens through a cascade of enzymes, each one activating several more, layer after layer, until the original signal has grown enormously in scale, all within a fraction of a second. This is part of why hormones can remain so effective, even at such faint concentrations. The body does not need a large amount of the original molecule, because the cell itself is built to multiply that signal internally, turning one small message into a full, coordinated internal response. It is an elegant kind of efficiency, one that allows the body to conserve resources while still producing responses powerful enough to shift heart rate alertness or metabolism almost instantly. Considered closely, this reveals something quietly beautiful about biology itself. The idea that a single, nearly invisible arrival can ripple outward into thousands of coordinated actions, not through force or abundance, but simply through the elegant, patient architecture already built into every living cell. At the very center of the entire hormonal system sits a partnership between two small structures, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, working so closely together that they are often described as a single coordinated unit, rather than two separate parts. The hypothalamus, situated deep within the brain, constantly monitors the body's internal state, tracking temperature, hunger, hydration, and stress, then translates what it senses into chemical instructions. Those instructions are passed directly to the pituitary gland, resting just beneath it, which then releases its own hormones outward, directing the thyroid, the adrenal glands, and the reproductive organs, among others, to adjust their own hormone production accordingly. This creates a kind of layered command structure, where the brain does not need to directly manage every hormone in the body individually. Instead, it manages a small handful of key instructions, trusting the rest of the system to carry those instructions outward and interpret them correctly. Nearly every major hormonal shift a person experiences throughout life growth, during childhood changes, during puberty, the daily rhythm of waking and sleeping, the body's response to prolonged stress can be traced back, at least in part, to this same small partnership working quietly at the center of the brain. It is a remarkably efficient design, two small structures no larger than a thumb, combined quietly overseeing a system that touches nearly every organ in the body. There is a certain elegance in that simplicity, complexity, built not from countless separate commanders, but from just two working together in careful, constant conversation. Unlike many hormones that rise and fall within seconds or minutes, thyroid hormone behaves quite differently, remaining active in the bloodstream for several days after it is first released. This extended presence reflects the particular role thyroid hormone plays within the body, less like an urgent alarm and more like a steady, sustained influence, gradually shaping how quickly cells throughout the body use energy over an extended period of time. Because of this longer duration, the thyroid does not need to release hormone constantly or urgently. Instead, it maintains a slow, steady output, trusting that each release will remain effective for days rather than moments. This is also why thyroid imbalances tend to build gradually rather than appear suddenly. A person experiencing low thyroid hormone will typically not notice a sudden shift, but rather a slow creeping change over weeks, fatigue arriving gradually, cold sensitivity increasing little by little, energy quietly fading day after day. The same gradual pattern applies in reverse when thyroid hormone levels rise too high. This extended timeline stands in sharp contrast to hormones like adrenaline, which appear and disappear within moments, revealing just how differently the body's chemical messengers are designed, depending on their purpose. Some are built for urgency. Others, like thyroid hormone, are built for patience, for steadiness, for maintaining a particular rhythm over days rather than seconds. It is a quiet reminder that not every important signal in the body needs to be fast. Some of the most essential ones are simply built to last. If thyroid hormone represents patience, adrenaline represents urgency, and nowhere is that contrast clearer than in how quickly each one disappears from the bloodstream once its work is done. While thyroid hormone can remain active for several days, adrenaline breaks down and clears from the blood within only a couple of minutes, sometimes even faster, once the moment that triggered its release has passed. This rapid disappearance is not a flaw in the system. It is in fact exactly what the body requires. Adrenaline exists to prepare the body for sudden, immediate action. A racing heart, heightened alertness, quickened breathing. And once that need has passed, lingering adrenaline would serve no purpose at all, leaving the body needlessly tense long after any actual danger had ended. Instead, specialized enzymes in the liver and bloodstream quickly break adrenaline down into inactive byproducts, allowing the heart rate to ease, the breathing to slow, and the body to gradually return to its resting state. This is part of why the physical sensation of a sudden fright tends to fade relatively quickly, even if the emotional memory of that fright lingers considerably longer. The chemistry resolves itself within minutes, even when the feeling itself takes a little longer to fully settle. There is something quietly reassuring in this design, the understanding that the body is never meant to remain in a heightened state indefinitely. It is built to respond quickly, and just as importantly, built to recover just as quickly, clearing the alarm the moment it is no longer needed. It is easy to imagine a single cell as something small and simple, and in size this is certainly true. Yet in terms of sheer sensitivity, a single cell is remarkably complex. Many cells throughout the body carry hundreds of thousands of hormone receptors scattered across their outer surface, each one waiting patiently for a particular hormone to arrive and bind to it. This means that at any given moment, a single cell is not simply floating passively within the bloodstream. It is actively listening, in a sense prepared to respond the instant the right chemical signal happens to pass by. Different cells carry different combinations of receptors, which is part of why the same hormone can produce entirely different effects depending on which cell happens to receive it. A liver cell, a muscle cell, and a brain cell may all encounter the very same hormone molecule, and yet each will respond according to its own particular set of receptors, translating that single incoming signal into a response suited specifically to its own function. This vast number of receptors also allows the body a remarkable degree of sensitivity, capable of detecting even very small shifts in hormone concentration and adjusting accordingly. Considered on this scale, a single cell begins to seem far less simple than it first appeared, less like a small passive unit, and more like a finely tuned receiver, constantly alert, constantly listening, prepared at every moment to translate a quiet chemical whisper into a precise and meaningful response. Cortisol does not require an alarm, a calendar, or even daylight to maintain its rhythm. Instead, it follows an internal cycle that repeats itself roughly every 24 hours, guided by a small cluster of cells deep within the brain that function as the body's own natural clock. This rhythm typically begins with a noticeable rise shortly after waking, followed by a slow, steady decline throughout the remainder of the day, reaching its lowest point sometime late at night, before beginning to climb again in preparation for the following morning. What makes this pattern so remarkable is its persistence. Even in experiments where participants were placed in environments without windows, clocks, or any external cues indicating time of day, cortisol continued to follow this same approximate 24-hour rhythm, rising and falling on its own, guided entirely by an internal sense of timing rather than any outside signal. This suggests that the body carries something close to an inner calendar, one that persists quietly beneath conscious awareness, counting the passage of each day independently of sunlight, schedules, or clocks. Modern life, of course, often disrupts this rhythm through irregular sleep travel across time zones or nights spent awake under artificial light. Yet even then, the body continues attempting to maintain its natural pattern, adjusting slowly, patiently, back toward its familiar rhythm, whenever circumstances finally allow. There is something quietly reassuring in this persistence. The idea that somewhere deep within the body continues keeping its own steady time regardless of what the outside world happens to be doing around it. The body does not wait until digestion is complete to begin preparing for the arrival of new energy. In fact, insulin release often begins within minutes of the very first bite of a meal, sometimes even slightly before food has been swallowed at all. This early response, sometimes called the cephalic phase, is triggered partly by taste, smell, and the simple anticipation of eating, allowing the pancreas to begin releasing a small amount of insulin in advance, preparing the body's cells to receive the glucose that will soon follow. As digestion continues and sugar from the meal begins entering the bloodstream, insulin release increases further, helping guide that glucose into cells throughout the body where it can be used for energy or stored for later. This anticipatory response reflects a kind of biological foresight, the body preparing itself slightly ahead of need, rather than reacting only after a challenge has already arrived. It also explains why eating slowly and truly noticing a meal may support smoother digestion overall, since the earliest stages of insulin release are partly triggered by sensory experience itself. The sight, the smell, the anticipation, not simply the food's arrival in the stomach. Considered this way, something as ordinary as sitting down for a meal becomes a quietly coordinated event, a gentle, well-timed release, beginning before the first bite is even finished, the body already responding, already preparing, already working softly in the background to keep everything in careful balance. Rather than releasing insulin in a single steady stream, the pancreas instead produces it in a series of small, carefully timed bursts, repeated many times throughout a single day. This pulsing pattern occurs roughly every few minutes, even between meals, maintaining a low, steady baseline that helps keep blood sugar levels gently stable throughout ordinary daily activities. When food arrives, these pulses become larger and more frequent, rising to meet the sudden increase in circulating sugar, then gradually easing back once digestion is complete and blood sugar levels have settled again. Researchers studying this pattern have found that these small rhythmic pulses may actually be more effective than a single continuous release would be, allowing cells to remain sensitive and responsive to insulin over time, rather than becoming gradually less responsive to a hormone that never pauses. This is part of why some approaches to managing blood sugar attempt to mimic this same natural pulsing rhythm, rather than relying on a single flat release. The pancreas, in other words, behaves less like a faucet left steadily running, and more like a careful, attentive presence checking in repeatedly throughout the day, adjusting its response each time based on current need. It is a subtle but meaningful distinction, revealing that even something as seemingly simple as insulin release involves a surprising degree of rhythm and timing, a quiet pulse repeated patiently, again and again, working continuously to keep the body's energy in careful, steady balance. Consider the full distance a single signal might need to travel, beginning deep within the brain and ending somewhere as far away as the toes. And yet, remarkably, this entire journey can be completed within just a few seconds. A signal originating in the hypothalamus, perhaps in response to sudden cold or unexpected danger, can travel down through the pituitary, trigger the release of a hormone into the bloodstream, and reach receptors in the feet, adjusting blood flow or muscle tension, all within moments, despite the considerable physical distance involved. This speed becomes possible because the entire system is built for continuous circulation rather than isolated one-time delivery. Blood is always moving, always flowing, which means a hormone released anywhere in the body is immediately swept into a current, already heading toward every extremity, every organ, every distant corner of the body, without needing to wait for a dedicated pathway to be built first. This is part of why the body can respond so quickly and so completely to sudden changes, whether stepping into cold water or reacting to a sudden startle. The response is never limited to just one location. It spreads outward quickly and thoroughly, reaching even the farthest parts of the body almost as quickly as it reaches the places closest to where it began. There is something quietly remarkable in this, the understanding that no part of the body is ever truly far from another. Not when a single chemical signal can travel from brain to toe in less time than it takes to finish a single breath. Many of the chemical processes that allow hormones to function properly depend on the body maintaining a remarkably narrow range of internal temperature, typically shifting by only a few degrees at most, even under fairly extreme outside conditions. This narrow range is not accidental. Many hormone receptors, along with the enzymes that help produce and break down hormones, are shaped in ways that only function correctly within this fairly precise temperature window. Even a modest shift outside this range can begin to affect how efficiently certain hormonal signals are sent and received. This is part of why fever, though uncomfortable, is treated by the body as a deliberate, purposeful response, rather than a malfunction. A carefully controlled adjustment aimed at making conditions less favorable for invading illness, rather than an uncontrolled failure of internal regulation. The hypothalamus itself, the very structure responsible for directing much of the body's hormonal activity, also happens to be the same structure responsible for regulating body temperature, which is perhaps not a coincidence at all. These two systems appear closely linked: temperature and hormone activity, working together, each influencing the other in a continuous, quiet balance. This helps explain why illness so often brings noticeable shifts in appetite, energy, and mood, alongside physical discomfort, since a change in temperature does not remain isolated, but instead ripples outward into the broader hormonal system as well. It is a fitting reminder that the body rarely treats any single system in isolation. Temperature, chemistry, and hormonal balance remain quietly, continuously connected, each one shaping the other within a narrow, carefully protected range. It may seem unlikely that something as simple and freely available as a single breath could meaningfully influence the body's internal chemistry, and yet research has shown that certain hormone levels can shift measurably within minutes of just one deep, slow breath, particularly when that breath is drawn out fully and released slowly. This effect appears to work largely through the vagus nerve, a long nerve connecting the brain to several major organs, which becomes more active during slow, deliberate breathing. As the vagus nerve activates, it helps ease the body's stress response, gently lowering circulating cortisol and encouraging a small corresponding rise in the sense of calm the body associates with safety. This is part of why deep breathing exercises, though simple enough to seem almost too easy, have been shown repeatedly to produce real, measurable physiological effects, not just a subjective feeling of relaxation, but an actual shift in circulating hormone levels within a fairly short window of time. What makes this particularly meaningful is how accessible it remains, available at any moment, requiring no equipment, no medication, and no particular skill beyond simply choosing to slow down and breathe with intention. The body, in other words, has built its own quiet reset button directly into something every person already does, automatically, thousands of times a day, without ever noticing. Sometimes calm does not need to be found somewhere far away. Sometimes it is simply waiting quietly inside the very next breath, ready to gently shift the body's chemistry the moment it is finally allowed to slow down. Across the span of a single menstrual cycle, estrogen levels do not remain steady at all, but instead shift by a wide margin, rising and falling in a fairly predictable pattern that repeats roughly once a month throughout much of adult life. Estrogen typically begins at its lowest point during menstruation, then rises steadily over the following 2 weeks, reaching its highest point shortly before ovulation, before dropping again and gradually rebuilding toward the next cycle. This is far from a minor fluctuation. The difference between estrogen's lowest and highest points within a single cycle can be considerable among the largest natural hormonal shifts the human body experiences on a regular repeating basis. These shifts influence far more than reproduction alone. Estrogen affects mood, energy levels, skin, bone density, and even certain aspects of memory and concentration, which is part of why some individuals notice fairly clear patterns in how they feel across different points within their own cycle. Rather than representing instability, this rhythm reflects a finely coordinated biological process, one that has repeated itself largely unchanged across countless generations. Understanding this rhythm offers something valuable, a reminder that hormonal fluctuation is not the same as imbalance. Regular predictable change is simply part of how certain systems in the body are designed to function. There is a quiet kind of order hidden within what might otherwise seem like simple variation, a monthly rhythm that has been rising and falling faithfully for as long as the human body itself has existed. Long before a child takes a first breath, the hormonal system has already been quietly active, and remarkably, a newborn enters the world, already carrying measurable levels of dozens of distinct hormones, many inherited temporarily from the mother during the final weeks of pregnancy, others already being produced independently by the infant's own developing glands. This is part of why newborns sometimes display certain temporary physical traits shortly after birth related to maternal hormones still circulating briefly in their system, effects that typically fade within the first days or weeks of life, as the infant's own hormonal system takes over completely. Even in the womb, hormones play an essential role in guiding development, shaping the growth of organs, the maturing of the brain, and the timing of birth itself, which is believed to be triggered, at least in part, by a coordinated hormonal signal between mother and child. Once born, the infant's own endocrine system continues developing rapidly, gradually establishing rhythms that will eventually mature into the familiar hormonal patterns of childhood and adulthood. Sleep and wake cycles slowly settling, appetite regulation, gradually refining growth hormone, beginning its own steady, pulsing rhythm. This means the story shared this evening did not begin recently. It began before memory, before language, before conscious awareness of any kind, quietly active from the very earliest days of life. Every person listening tonight once carried this same quiet, active chemistry present and working long before there was ever a name for what it was doing. One of the most enduring images used to describe how hormones function is the simple comparison of a key fitting into a lock. And while science often finds ways to complicate its own metaphors, this particular comparison has remained useful, for good reason. Each hormone receptor is shaped with remarkable specificity, built to recognize the particular structure of one hormone, or in some cases, a small handful of closely related hormones, while remaining largely unresponsive to anything else circulating nearby. This precision matters enormously. Blood carries an enormous mixture of different hormones simultaneously, and without this careful specificity, cells would have no reliable way of distinguishing one chemical message from another. The key and lock comparison also helps explain certain medical treatments, since some medications are designed deliberately to mimic a hormone's shape closely enough to fit into its receptor, either activating it artificially or, in other cases, blocking it entirely to prevent the body's own hormone from binding there instead. This is part of how many modern medications are able to influence very specific hormonal pathways without disrupting the rest of the body's chemistry unnecessarily. Considered closely, this specificity reveals something quietly elegant about the entire hormonal system. The idea that among an overwhelming mixture of chemical messages constantly circulating throughout the bloodstream, each cell still manages to recognize precisely the one message meant specifically for it, responding faithfully, again and again, the way a lock has always known exactly which key belongs to it. A single hormone released just once from a single gland does not always produce the same effect throughout the entire body. Instead, its effect often depends entirely on which particular organ happens to receive it, since different organs interpret the very same chemical signal in entirely different ways. Adrenaline offers a particularly clear example of this. In the heart, adrenaline increases the rate and strength of each beat. In the lungs, that same hormone widens the airways, allowing more oxygen to enter with each breath. In the digestive system, however, adrenaline does the opposite of stimulating activity, actually slowing digestion down considerably, since energy is being prioritized elsewhere during a moment of urgency. This variation is possible because different organs contain different types and combinations of receptors, each one translating the same incoming signal according to its own particular function. In this sense, a hormone behaves less like a single fixed instruction and more like a shared word capable of holding several different meanings, depending entirely on the context in which it is received. This allows the body to coordinate an enormously complex full-body response, using a relatively small number of hormones, rather than requiring a completely separate chemical message for every single organ involved. It is an efficient, elegant design. One message sent once, interpreted differently and appropriately by each part of the body that receives it, working together in that single moment toward the very same shared and coordinated purpose. Among all the hormones found throughout the animal kingdom, insulin stands out as one of the most remarkably preserved across evolutionary time, changing very little across tens of millions of years and across an enormous range of different mammal species. The insulin found in a pig, for instance, is similar enough to human insulin that, for decades, before synthetic alternatives became widely available, pig insulin was used directly to treat human diabetes, with the body largely accepting it as though it were its own. This kind of preservation is rare in biology, and when it occurs, it usually signals that a particular molecule performs a function so essential, so foundational to survival, that evolution has had very little reason to alter it significantly across countless generations and species. Insulin's core task, regulating how cells absorb and use sugar for energy, has remained a fundamental requirement across nearly every animal, with a bloodstream from small rodents to large mammals, including humans. Considered this way, insulin becomes something of a quiet evolutionary thread, connecting an enormous range of different species across an enormous stretch of time, each one relying on a hormone built from almost the very same chemical blueprint. There is something quietly humbling in this fact, the understanding that a molecule circulating right now inside every person listening tonight is nearly identical to one that has been quietly regulating energy inside mammals for tens of millions of years, largely unchanged, because it has simply always worked exactly as it needed to. Something as brief and ordinary as a hug, lasting only a handful of seconds, has been shown to measurably raise oxytocin levels in the person receiving it, along with the person offering it. Researchers studying this effect have found that even short physical contact, far shorter than most people would consider a meaningful embrace, is often enough to trigger this quiet chemical shift. You may have felt this yourself, perhaps without ever naming it, that particular softening that follows a warm hug from someone familiar, a sense of ease settling in almost immediately, as though some quiet tension had simply been allowed to release. This is not simply emotional. It is chemical, traceable, measurable, in a laboratory setting, and yet it happens constantly in ordinary life, in doorways, in kitchens, in quiet moments before saying goodbye. What makes this particularly meaningful is how little effort it requires. A hug does not need to be prolonged or formal to produce this effect. Even a brief embrace between close friends or family members appears sufficient to trigger a small, genuine rise in oxytocin, gently lowering stress and encouraging a feeling of safety in both people involved. This may help explain why physical affection so often feels disproportionately comforting relative to how little time it actually takes. The body does not require grand gestures to register connection. It only requires a few honest seconds arms around another person, a shared moment of closeness. And somewhere quietly within a small chemical shift begins reminding the body gently that it is not alone. Laughter shared between two or more people appears to trigger something slightly different than laughter experienced alone, releasing a small shared wave of endorphins that seems to strengthen with genuine social connection. Researchers studying this phenomenon have found that laughing in the presence of others, particularly laughter that arises spontaneously rather than being forced, tends to produce a stronger endorphin response than laughing while alone, even when the humor itself is identical. This may help explain why a joke often feels funnier in a group than it does when read silently, and why shared laughter so often leaves people feeling closer afterward, not just amused but genuinely more connected. Endorphins, already known for their gentle, pain-relieving properties, appear to play a quiet role here as well, contributing to that pleasant, slightly warm feeling that often lingers after a good laugh shared among friends. This response may be part of why laughter has long been recognized across cultures as something that brings people together, not simply as entertainment, but as a genuine, chemically reinforced form of bonding. You may recall a specific moment like this yourself, a shared joke that left you laughing far longer than the joke alone seemed to deserve, carried forward simply by the presence of someone else laughing beside you. That extended laughter, that slightly giddy, easy feeling, is very likely endorphins at work, quietly reinforcing a bond that already existed. One small, shared wave of chemistry at a time. Before a significant moment, a job interview, a difficult conversation, a moment of long-awaited news, it is common to feel the heart begin to race, seemingly without permission, well before anything has actually happened. This sensation is adrenaline rising in anticipation, preparing the body to act even before the moment itself has fully arrived. The brain, sensing that something important is approaching, signals the adrenal glands to begin releasing adrenaline slightly ahead of time, increasing heart rate, sharpening focus, and readying the muscles much the same way it would in the presence of genuine physical danger. This response does not require actual danger to occur. It only requires the brain's perception that something significant is about to happen, whether that significance is threatening or simply important. This is why the same racing heart can accompany both fear and excitement, since the underlying chemistry is often remarkably similar in both cases. Understanding this can offer a small, quiet reassurance in moments that feel overwhelming. A racing heart before something important is not a sign that something is wrong. It is simply the body preparing itself, doing exactly what it has always done, readying itself for a moment it has judged to be meaningful. The next time you feel your own heart quicken before something important, you might consider that this is not fear working against you, but simply an old familiar system, quietly and faithfully preparing you to meet the moment ahead, with everything the body has to offer. That familiar, fluttering sensation felt low in the stomach before a first date, often described simply as butterflies, traces back to a small, ordinary burst of adrenaline, the very same hormone responsible for far more dramatic responses to genuine danger. When adrenaline rises, blood flow shifts away from the digestive system and toward the muscles in preparation for possible action. And this sudden redirection is often what produces that unmistakable fluttering or slightly hollow feeling in the stomach. The brain in this case is not responding to actual danger, but rather to anticipation, uncertainty, and the significance of a moment that feels emotionally important. This means the body cannot always distinguish between nervous excitement and nervous fear. since both often rely on very similar chemical pathways. This shared chemistry may help explain why nervousness and excitement so often feel remarkably similar. A quickened pulse, a fluttering stomach, a heightened sense of awareness regardless of whether the underlying emotion is closer to worry or anticipation. Perhaps you remember a moment like this yourself, waiting somewhere important, feeling that same familiar flutter rise without warning. That sensation, so often described in stories and songs as something purely emotional, is in truth deeply physical as well. A small, ordinary hormone doing exactly what it has always done, preparing the body for a moment that feels significant, regardless of whether that moment brings comfort, connection, or simply the quiet uncertainty of something new about to begin. When breakfast is skipped, ghrelin, the hormone responsible for triggering hunger, does not simply disappear or quiet down as the morning continues. Instead, it often remains elevated, continuing to rise gradually until the next meal finally arrives, which frequently makes that following meal feel considerably more urgent, more difficult to resist than it might have felt otherwise. This happens because the body, having anticipated food at its usual time, continues sending increasingly insistent hunger signals when that expected meal fails to appear. By the time lunch arrives, ghrelin levels may be considerably higher than they would have been with a modest breakfast earlier in the day, making it more difficult to eat slowly, or to recognize the point of comfortable fullness before eating past it. This does not mean skipping a single meal causes any lasting harm, but it does offer a useful, gentle insight into why hunger sometimes feels disproportionately strong later in the day. The body is not being dramatic or exaggerating its need. It is simply responding honestly to a hormone that has been rising patiently, for longer than usual. Perhaps you have experienced this yourself. A morning that moved too quickly for breakfast, followed by an afternoon hunger that felt far stronger than expected. That feeling, so often mistaken for weakness or impatience, is simply ghrelin doing precisely what it was designed to do, growing louder the longer it waits, quietly reminding the body that it has been patient long enough already. As a meal progresses, particularly one that includes a reasonable balance of protein, fiber, and healthy fat, ghrelin levels begin to fall steadily, while another hormone, one associated with fullness, gradually rises in its place. This shift does not happen instantly. It unfolds gradually, over the course of roughly 20 minutes, which is part of why eating slowly so often supports a more comfortable, satisfying sense of fullness than eating quickly. When food is consumed too rapidly, it becomes easy to eat well past the point of genuine satisfaction, simply because the fullness signal has not yet had sufficient time to rise and register fully within the brain. This quiet exchange between two opposing hormones, one gradually quieting, one gradually rising, represents a kind of internal negotiation, the body carefully balancing hunger against satisfaction throughout the course of a single meal. It also helps explain why a meal eaten while distracted, rushed, or eaten while doing something else entirely often leaves a person feeling less satisfied overall, even if the same amount of food was consumed. The signals were simply given less time and attention to properly register. There is something quietly worth considering in this, a gentle invitation to slow down occasionally, to notice a meal a little more fully, allowing these two hormones the time they naturally need to complete their quiet, ongoing conversation. One gradually easing, the other gradually rising, until the body finally, comfortably feels that it has received enough. Physical activity, particularly sustained activity like running, cycling, or swimming, triggers the release of endorphins, and remarkably, the calming effects of this release can often linger for hours after the activity itself has ended. This lingering calm is sometimes casually referred to as a runner's high, though the effect extends well beyond running alone, appearing after many different forms of sustained physical effort. During exercise, endorphins help offset the physical discomfort of exertion, allowing the body to continue working even as muscles begin to tire. Once the activity ends, though, These same endorphins do not disappear immediately. Instead, they continue circulating, gradually contributing to a lingering sense of calm, occasionally even mild euphoria that can extend well into the following hours. This may help explain why many people report feeling unusually clear-headed, calm, or even quietly content after a workout, even if the exercise itself felt physically demanding in the moment. The body, in a sense, rewards sustained effort with sustained comfort afterward. A kind of chemical thank you offered once the physical demand has finally passed. Perhaps you have noticed this yourself. A walk or workout that felt difficult in the moment, followed by an afternoon that somehow felt lighter, easier, calmer than expected. That lingering ease is not imagination. It is endorphins quietly extending their gentle influence well beyond the moment of effort itself, offering the body a slow, steady return to calm. A short walk taken outdoors, even one lasting only about 20 minutes, has been shown to measurably lower circulating cortisol, offering one of the simplest, most accessible ways to ease the body out of a stressed state. This effect appears to come from several factors working together at once: gentle physical movement, exposure to natural light, and a change of environment away from whatever setting may have contributed to rising stress in the first place. Researchers studying this pattern have found that walking in natural surroundings, such as a park or tree-lined street, tends to produce a slightly stronger cortisol reduction than walking through a purely urban setting, though both appear to offer some benefit. The body does not require intense exercise to begin easing its stress response. A relatively gentle pace, one that allows for steady breathing and a slightly wandering attention, seems to be enough to encourage cortisol to begin its gradual decline. This may help explain why stepping outside during a difficult afternoon so often brings a small, genuine sense of relief, one that feels emotional in the moment, but is underneath distinctly physical as well. You might recall a moment like this yourself, a short walk taken simply to clear your thoughts, returning afterward feeling somehow lighter, calmer, more settled than before you left. That shift was not only in your mind. Somewhere quietly within, cortisol was easing gently, guided by nothing more than open-air steady footsteps and 20 unhurried minutes spent simply moving forward. Something as simple as holding the hand of someone trusted and familiar has been shown in several studies to gently lower blood pressure, an effect closely tied to the quiet rise of oxytocin that so often accompanies close physical touch. Researchers observing this response have found that the effect tends to be strongest between people who already share a close established bond, a partner, a close friend, a parent, suggesting that familiarity and trust play a meaningful role in how strongly the body responds. Oxytocin, once released, appears to ease tension within blood vessels themselves, allowing blood to flow slightly more freely and easing the overall workload placed on the heart. This means that comfort in this particular case is not simply a feeling experienced in the mind. It is a measurable physical shift, traceable directly to a hormone responding to touch. This may help explain why holding someone's hand during a stressful moment, a difficult medical appointment, an anxious wait, a moment of grief, so often brings a sense of ease that feels disproportionate to something as simple as two hands touching. The body is not exaggerating that comfort. It is responding honestly, chemically, to the presence of someone trusted nearby. Perhaps you have felt this yourself, a hand held during a difficult moment, and a strange, quiet calm settling in almost immediately afterward. That calm was real and traceable. A small hormone easing tension exactly where it was needed, simply because someone familiar chose to stay close beside you. Blushing, that familiar warmth that rises unexpectedly in the cheeks during moments of embarrassment or sudden attention, traces back directly to adrenaline, which causes tiny blood vessels just beneath the surface of the skin to widen, rapidly allowing more blood to flow closer to the surface than usual. This is why blushing so often appears suddenly and involuntarily, since it is driven by the same rapid hormonal response responsible for far more dramatic reactions to stress or surprise. The face tends to blush more visibly than most other areas of the body, largely because the skin there is thinner and its blood vessels sit closer to the surface, making even a small increase in blood flow immediately noticeable to anyone nearby. What makes blushing particularly interesting is how difficult it is to consciously control, because it is driven by the same automatic hormonal pathway responsible for the body's broader stress response. It typically cannot be stopped simply by deciding to stop it, which may be part of why blushing so often feels embarrassing. In itself an entirely honest, visible reaction that cannot be hidden away or reasoned with in the moment. Considered this way, blushing becomes less something to feel self-conscious about, and more a small, visible reminder of just how immediately and honestly the body responds to emotion. It is adrenaline, doing exactly what it always does, responding rapidly to a perceived moment of significance, only this time, instead of quickening a heartbeat unseen, it rises quietly, visibly, softly, warming the surface of the skin for everyone nearby to see. Yawning is one of the more curious behaviors shared across nearly all people, and one of its stranger qualities is how easily it spreads from one person to another, sometimes triggered simply by watching someone else yawn or even by reading about yawning itself. While the exact mechanism remains an area of ongoing research, scientists believe this contagious quality likely involves a combination of subtle neural mimicry and small hormonal shifts related to empathy and social connection, particularly among people who already share a close bond. Some researchers suggest that contagious yawning may be linked to mirror neurons, brain cells that activate both when performing an action and when observing someone else perform that same action, potentially reinforced by small shifts in oxytocin among socially connected individuals. Interestingly, contagious yawning tends to occur more frequently between people who know each other well, close friends or family members, than between strangers, suggesting that social closeness itself may influence how strongly this response occurs. This detail hints at something gently meaningful, the idea that even something as small and seemingly meaningless as a yawn may be quietly shaped by connection, by familiarity, by the same underlying systems that support empathy and bonding. More broadly, you may have noticed this yourself. Sitting beside someone close to you, catching a yawn without ever meaning to. That small involuntary mirroring may be, in its own quiet way, one more subtle sign of the deep, automatic connection the body maintains with those it feels closest to. Unlike a brief startle which triggers a quick spike of adrenaline followed by rapid recovery, a prolonged stressful period such as an approaching deadline, stretched across several days, can keep cortisol elevated well beyond the moment the actual task has finally been completed. This happens because cortisol, unlike adrenaline, is designed to support sustained effort rather than sudden reaction, remaining active for as long as the body continues perceiving an ongoing demand. Once a deadline passes, the body does not always return to its baseline immediately. Cortisol may remain mildly elevated for hours, sometimes longer, gradually easing, only once the nervous system fully registers that the pressure has genuinely passed. This delayed recovery may help explain why finishing a demanding project does not always bring the immediate sense of relief one might expect, since the body's chemistry sometimes lags slightly behind the mind's own understanding that the challenge is over. This is not a flaw in the system, but rather a reflection of how differently cortisol is built compared to faster-acting hormones, designed for endurance rather than a rapid return to calm. Recognizing this pattern can offer a gentle kind of patience toward oneself after a demanding stretch, an understanding that the body may simply need a little more time to fully settle, even after the mind has already moved on. Rest in these moments is not laziness. It is simply the quiet, necessary time cortisol needs to finish its own slow, steady journey back toward balance. Sustained stress, particularly when it continues over many months without adequate relief, has been shown in research to gradually shrink a small brain region known as the hippocampus, an area closely tied to memory, formation, and emotional regulation. This effect is believed to result from prolonged elevated cortisol exposure, which over extended periods can interfere with the growth of new cells within this particular region, while also affecting existing connections between them. This does not happen quickly, and it does not happen from ordinary short-term stress, the kind experienced during a busy week or a demanding deadline. It tends to develop gradually over extended periods of consistently high, unrelieved stress, often stretching across many months or longer. Encouragingly, research also suggests that this effect is not necessarily permanent. Once chronic stress eases, whether through rest, support, or meaningful lifestyle change, the hippocampus appears capable of gradually recovering some of its earlier structure and function. A quiet reminder that the brain retains a genuine capacity for repair, even after prolonged difficulty. This finding underscores something worth taking seriously: the understanding that chronic stress is not simply an emotional burden, but a physical one as well, capable of shaping the brain itself over time. It also offers a gentler counterpoint: the knowledge that rest, support, and relief are not indulgences, but essential ingredients the brain genuinely needs in order to heal. Even something as quiet and internal as memory depends in part on simply being given the chance to finally fully rest. Among couples who have spent many years together, researchers have observed something quietly remarkable: a tendency for certain hormone rhythms, particularly cortisol, to gradually synchronize between partners, especially during periods spent physically close together. This does not happen immediately upon meeting someone, but rather develops slowly over shared routines, shared meals, shared mornings and evenings repeated so many times that the body itself seems to begin adjusting its rhythms to match. When one partner experiences a stressful day, the other partner's cortisol sometimes rises slightly as well, even without any direct conversation about what happened, almost as though stress itself has become quietly contagious between two people who know each other deeply. This synchronization appears strongest in relationships marked by genuine emotional closeness, suggesting that the effect is not simply proximity, but something closer to attunement. Two nervous systems gradually learning to move in step with one another. There is a tender kind of meaning in this discovery, the understanding that closeness is not only expressed through words or gestures, but is quietly built into the body itself, two people's internal rhythms, slowly drawing nearer to each other the longer they remain close. Perhaps this explains why a long-term partner can sometimes sense distress before a single word has been spoken, not through intuition alone, but through a kind of shared chemistry built patiently over years. Somewhere within two people who have grown close, their bodies have been quietly listening to each other all along, learning slowly to breathe in something close to the same rhythm. During breastfeeding, a mother's body releases two hormones working closely together: oxytocin and prolactin, each contributing to a different part of the same quiet process. Oxytocin triggers what is often called the letdown reflex, helping milk flow more easily, while also encouraging a strong sense of calm and closeness between mother and child in that particular moment. Prolactin, meanwhile, supports the ongoing production of milk itself, while also appearing to contribute to feelings of nurturing and attentiveness during this early period. Together, these two hormones create something of a quiet feedback loop: physical closeness, encouraging their release, and their release in turn, encouraging even greater closeness and attentiveness in response. This may help explain why breastfeeding is so often described by those who experience it as deeply bonding, not simply because of the act itself, but because of the specific hormonal environment it creates, one built specifically to support connection during a particularly vulnerable stage of early life. This hormonal support does not end quickly either, continuing to rise gently with each feeding, reinforcing the relationship, gradually feeding after feeding, day after day. There is something quietly profound in recognizing that even something as ordinary and repeated as feeding a child is not purely mechanical, but chemically supported toward closeness at every step. The body in this early and vulnerable season seems to understand instinctively what bonding requires, offering exactly the right hormones at exactly the right moment to help two people begin to know each other. While pregnancy and childbirth bring dramatic hormonal changes for mothers, research has shown that fathers too experience measurable hormonal shifts, particularly after spending consistent time caring for a newborn. Testosterone levels in new fathers often decline modestly during this period, a shift researchers believe may support increased patience, attentiveness, and reduced aggression during the demanding early months of caregiving. At the same time, oxytocin levels in fathers tend to rise, particularly with increased physical contact, holding soothing and simple close presence with the infant, mirroring to a smaller degree the same bonding chemistry observed in mothers. This suggests that hormonal bonding is not limited strictly to biological motherhood, but responds instead to genuine caregiving itself, rising in proportion to time spent, attention given, and closeness shared, regardless of which parent is providing it. Researchers studying this pattern have noted that fathers who spend more direct time in early caregiving tend to show stronger hormonal shifts than those with less involvement, reinforcing the idea that this response is shaped significantly by experience and effort, not simply biology alone. This finding offers something quietly meaningful, a reminder that bonding is not a fixed trait belonging to only one parent, but something the body actively builds chemically in response to genuine presence and care. Whoever chooses to stay close, to hold, to soothe, to remain steadily present through those early demanding weeks, the body responds in kind, quietly reinforcing that closeness, one small hormonal shift at a time. The rapid physical growth so often associated with adolescence is driven largely by growth hormone, released in its largest pulses during deep sleep, a pattern already familiar from earlier in this evening, though during the teenage years. This rhythm intensifies considerably beyond its usual pace. During puberty, growth hormone works alongside rising levels of testosterone or estrogen, depending on the individual together, triggering the noticeable increase in height, muscle development, and bone growth that characterizes this particular stage of life. This is part of why adolescents often require considerably more sleep than adults, since so much of this critical growth work depends specifically on the deep, uninterrupted sleep stages occurring earlier in the night. A teenager who consistently sleeps too little may not simply feel tired the following day, but may also be quietly missing some of the very hormonal activity most responsible for healthy physical development during this particular window of life. Growth during adolescence does not happen at a perfectly steady pace either, but often arrives in noticeable spurts, closely tied to periods of especially deep restorative sleep. This may help explain why growth sometimes seems to happen almost overnight, a phrase that, in this particular case, carries more literal truth than it first appears. Somewhere within every teenager sleeping soundly tonight, growth hormone is quietly doing some of its most important work, patiently building height, strength, and structure, one deep restorative pulse at a time entirely, while sleep continues undisturbed. The familiar cracking or breaking voice, so often associated with male puberty, traces directly back to testosterone, which causes the voice box, known formally as the larynx, to grow rapidly larger and its surrounding cartilage to thicken considerably over a relatively short period of time. This rapid growth causes the vocal cords themselves to lengthen and thicken as well. which gradually lowers the pitch of the voice, though the process rarely happens smoothly or all at once. During this transition, a teenager's control over their own newly enlarged voice box has not yet fully caught up with its rapid physical growth, which is part of why the voice may unpredictably shift between higher and lower registers during this particular stage, sometimes within a single sentence. This same testosterone surge also causes a visible enlargement of the larynx itself, sometimes noticeable as a small protrusion at the front of the throat, an early and lasting physical marker of this particular hormonal transition. While this stage is often remembered with a certain amount of embarrassment, it represents something quite ordinary and universal, a body adjusting to a rapid structural change, faster than its own coordination can immediately manage. Within a relatively short period, coordination typically catches up, and the voice settles into its new, deeper register with far greater consistency. It is a small, temporary reminder of just how physically active puberty truly is. Testosterone reshaping something as fundamental as the human voice, quietly, gradually, one deepening tone at a time. During pregnancy, a hormone called relaxin rises steadily, performing a task suggested clearly by its own name, gently loosening the ligaments and connective tissue throughout the pelvis in preparation for childbirth. This loosening allows the pelvic region to expand slightly during delivery, creating additional space to accommodate the process of birth itself. An adjustment that would be far more difficult without this particular hormonal preparation, occurring gradually over the preceding months. Relaxin does not limit its effect strictly to the pelvis, however, often loosening ligaments throughout the entire body to a smaller degree, which may explain why some pregnant individuals notice increased joint flexibility, or occasionally mild joint discomfort in areas seemingly unrelated to pregnancy itself, such as the wrists or ankles. This widespread loosening reflects the body's broader preparation for an enormous physical event, adjusting itself gradually and thoroughly well in advance of the moment it will actually be needed. Once childbirth has occurred, relaxin levels begin to decline gradually, allowing ligaments to slowly regain their earlier firmness over the following months. This particular hormone offers a quiet example of the body's remarkable foresight during pregnancy, preparing structural changes months in advance, patiently, gradually, long before those changes are actually required. It is a fitting reminder that pregnancy is not simply about the growth of a new life, but about an entire body reshaping itself gently and deliberately, in careful preparation for a single significant moment, still many months away. Morning sickness, experienced by a considerable number of individuals during early pregnancy, has been closely linked to a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin, which rises rapidly during the first several weeks after conception, reaching its highest levels around the same time morning sickness tends to feel most intense. While the exact relationship is still being studied closely, researchers have observed a fairly consistent pattern: symptoms often easing gradually as this particular hormone begins leveling off later in the first trimester. Despite its somewhat unfortunate reputation, this rapid hormonal rise plays an essential early role, helping maintain the pregnancy itself during its most delicate and vulnerable earliest weeks, supporting the structures that will eventually form the placenta. This means that although morning sickness can feel deeply uncomfortable, it often reflects a hormone actively performing important, necessary work during a critical developmental window, rather than something being wrong on its own. Interestingly, despite its common name, morning sickness does not confine itself strictly to mornings at all, and can arise at any point throughout the day, since the underlying hormone driving it remains elevated continuously, not just during early hours. Understanding this connection may offer a small measure of reassurance to anyone experiencing this particular stage of pregnancy. A reminder that discomfort in this case often signals a hormone working exactly as intended, quietly supporting new life during its earliest, most delicate beginning. even when that support does not always feel especially gentle in the speaks moment. Menopause unfolds not as a single sudden event, but as a gradual decline in estrogen, typically stretching across several years, reshaping many systems throughout the body along the way. As estrogen levels ease, bone density can gradually decrease, since estrogen plays a meaningful role in maintaining bone strength throughout adulthood. Skin elasticity may shift as well, alongside changes in body temperature regulation, which is part of what causes the sudden warmth many people describe experiencing during this transition. Sleep patterns often shift too, since estrogen interacts closely with several of the same systems responsible for regulating rest. None of these changes happen all at once. They arrive gradually, unevenly, sometimes stretching across the better part of a decade, as the body slowly adjusts to a new hormonal balance, quite different from the one it maintained throughout earlier adulthood. This gradual quality is worth noting, since it means the body is not failing during this transition, but rather adapting patiently to a genuinely significant shift in its own internal chemistry. Many other hormones adjust alongside estrogen during this period as well, recalibrating slowly in response to the change, gradually settling into a new stable rhythm over time. Considered this way, menopause becomes less a sudden ending and more a slow, deliberate transition, one the body has been quietly moving toward for years, adjusting gradually system by system until a new, steady balance is eventually found once again. In most men, testosterone follows a fairly predictable daily rhythm, typically reaching its highest point shortly after waking in the morning, then gradually declining throughout the day, easing to its lowest point sometime in the evening, before beginning to rise again overnight, in preparation for the following morning. This rhythm closely mirrors the daily pattern already described for cortisol, suggesting that several hormones tend to organize themselves around the same, broader internal clock, rising and falling in a coordinated relationship with each other, rather than functioning entirely independently. This daily fluctuation is considered entirely normal, and testosterone levels measured later in the day are expected to appear somewhat lower than those measured first thing in the morning. A detailed doctors typically account for when ordering related testing. Beyond this daily rhythm, testosterone can also be influenced more broadly by sleep quality, physical activity, and general stress levels, each capable of nudging this rhythm slightly higher or lower, depending on overall circumstances. This steady, repeating pattern offers a small reminder of how deeply hormonal rhythms are woven into the simple structure of a single day, rising with the morning, easing through the afternoon, and settling quietly by evening, prepared to begin the same gentle cycle again the following day. Even something as seemingly fixed as testosterone, so often associated with strength and constancy, follows its own quiet daily rhythm, rising and resting in careful rhythm with the sun. Jet lag occurs when a person travels quickly enough across multiple time zones that the body's internal clock, still calibrated to the previous location, finds itself suddenly out of step with the new pattern of daylight and darkness now surrounding it. This mismatch affects far more than simply feeling tired at unusual hours. It disrupts the coordinated rhythm of several hormones at once: melatonin, cortisol, and even hunger-related hormones like ghrelin, each still following the timing of the place recently left behind, rather than the place newly arrived in. This is part of why jet lag can bring not only fatigue, but also unusual hunger patterns, difficulty concentrating, and a general sense of feeling slightly out of sync with one's own surroundings. The body cannot simply be told to adjust instantly. These rhythms shift gradually, typically requiring roughly one full day of adjustment for each time zone crossed, as light exposure slowly recalibrates the internal clock, responsible for guiding melatonin and cortisol back into their proper rhythm. This is why exposure to natural daylight in a new location tends to ease jet lag more effectively than simply willing oneself to feel awake or asleep at the new appropriate hour. The body in this sense is not being stubborn. It is simply following its own honest, careful process, patiently realigning dozens of small hormonal rhythms, one gradual day at a time, until its internal sense of time finally quietly catches up with wherever it now finds itself. Individuals who work night shifts consistently over many years often experience measurable, lasting disruption to several hormonal rhythms, particularly those governed by light exposure and the body's internal clock, including cortisol, melatonin, and even certain hormones related to appetite and metabolism. Because these individuals are frequently required to remain alert during hours the body naturally associates with rest, and to sleep during hours it associates with wakefulness, several hormonal systems can struggle to find a stable, consistent rhythm over time, even with considerable effort to maintain a regular schedule. Researchers studying long-term night shift workers have observed patterns including elevated cortisol at unusual hours, disrupted melatonin production, and shifts in appetite-regulating hormones that can influence hunger and fullness in less predictable ways than typically seen in individuals working more conventional daytime hours. This does not suggest that night shift work is impossible to manage successfully, but it does highlight just how deeply hormonal rhythms are tied to light and darkness specifically, rather than simply to activity or rest alone. Some workplaces have begun addressing this more directly, adjusting lighting conditions or encouraging specific rest strategies designed to help stabilize these rhythms as much as reasonably possible under the circumstances. This serves as a meaningful reminder that the body's internal clock, though remarkably adaptable in many respects, still maintains certain firm preferences quietly shaped by daylight and darkness. Preferences that continue asserting themselves patiently even after years of a schedule working steadily against them. Exposure to natural sunlight earlier in the day plays a meaningful, often underappreciated role in supporting a smoother, more timely release of melatonin later that same night. This happens because the body's internal clock relies heavily on contrast, a clear distinction between bright daylight and genuine darkness, in order to time its hormonal signals accurately. When mornings and afternoons include reasonable exposure to natural light, the body receives a clear, unambiguous signal that day has arrived, which helps it more accurately anticipate and prepare for evening, allowing melatonin to begin rising more smoothly and at a more appropriate hour once darkness finally does arrive. Without this clear daytime contrast, particularly for individuals who spend most daylight hours indoors under artificial lighting, this internal signal can become somewhat blurred, making it more difficult for the body to distinguish day from evening with the same clarity. This may partially explain why simply stepping outside for a period during the morning or early afternoon, even briefly, has been associated with improved sleep quality later that same night for many people. The relationship in this sense works in both directions: bright, clear mornings supporting darker, more restful nights, each half of the day quietly reinforcing the other through the same shared hormonal rhythm. There is something quietly fitting in this pattern, a reminder that rest at night is not separate from the day that preceded it, but is instead gently prepared for hours in advance, simply by stepping, however briefly, into daylight. Caffeine, found commonly in coffee, has been shown to briefly raise cortisol levels beyond what the body's natural daily rhythm would otherwise produce on its own, an effect that tends to be strongest in people who do not consume caffeine regularly, and considerably milder in those accustomed to. This temporary rise typically peaks within about an hour after consumption, then gradually eases as caffeine itself is metabolized and cleared from the bloodstream over the following several hours. This effect helps explain part of why coffee can feel especially energizing, since it is not only blocking certain signals of tiredness within the brain, but also gently nudging the body's own natural alertness hormone slightly higher than it would otherwise be at that particular time of day. Interestingly, this effect tends to be considerably stronger when caffeine is consumed during already stressful circumstances, since cortisol, already elevated by stress, can rise even further when combined with caffeine's own separate hormonal influence. This is part of why some people notice feeling more noticeably jittery or unsettled when drinking coffee during an already demanding or anxious day, compared to drinking that same coffee during a calmer, more relaxed moment. Considered this way, coffee becomes not simply a matter of taste or habit, but a small, genuine hormonal influence, one capable of interacting meaningfully with whatever else the body's own chemistry happens to be experiencing at that particular moment, gently raising alertness and cortisol alongside it for a brief, familiar while. A single night of significantly reduced or skipped sleep has been shown to measurably raise ghrelin levels the following day, often leading to noticeably increased hunger and a stronger craving for high-energy foods than would typically be experienced after a full, restful night. This happens because sleep plays an essential role in maintaining the careful balance between ghrelin and its counterpart, hormone responsible for signaling fullness. And when sleep is cut short, this balance tends to tip noticeably toward increased hunger, sometimes considerably beyond what the body actually requires that day. Researchers studying this pattern have also observed that sleep deprivation tends to particularly increase cravings for foods high in sugar and fat, rather than a general evenly distributed increase in hunger across all types of food. This may help explain why a difficult, sleepless night so often leads to a following day marked by stronger cravings and less consistent appetite regulation than usual, a pattern many people notice personally without ever fully understanding its underlying hormonal cause. Encouragingly, this effect appears largely temporary, typically easing back toward normal fairly quickly once regular adequate sleep resumes. This offers a small, useful insight, a reminder that unusually strong hunger following a poor night's sleep is not a lack of discipline or willpower, but a fairly predictable hormonal response, one the body will likely correct on its own quietly, naturally as soon as it is finally given the chance to properly rest. Again, the sudden shock of cold water meeting skin, whether from a cool shower, a splash of water on the face, or stepping into a chilly lake, triggers a brief but genuine surge of adrenaline, along with a corresponding jolt of alertness that can feel almost immediate. This response happens because cold exposure is interpreted by the body as a sudden, unexpected change, requiring quick attention, prompting a fast hormonal response, even though no actual danger is present. Breathing often quickens slightly in that first moment. Heart rate rises and a sudden clarity of focus tends to follow shortly afterward, similar in some ways to the alertness triggered by a genuine surprise, though considerably milder and far more short-lived. This is part of why a splash of cool water on the face is sometimes recommended as a simple way to feel more awake or focused during a particularly tired or sluggish moment, since it engages this same rapid adrenaline pathway in a small, controlled, and entirely harmless way. Unlike more dramatic adrenaline responses, this particular surge tends to fade fairly quickly, often within just a minute or two, once the body recognizes that no further action is actually required. There is something quietly practical in this small, reliable response, a reminder that the body's alertness systems remain close at hand, ready to respond even to something as gentle and ordinary as cool water, offering a brief, genuine lift in focus whenever it happens to be needed most. A warm bath taken in the hour or so before bed can gently support the body's natural transition towards sleep, largely through its subtle influence on body temperature and its relationship with melatonin. As the body settles into warm water, its internal temperature rises slightly, and once out of the bath, that temperature begins to fall again fairly quickly, mimicking in a small way the natural drop in body temperature that typically occurs each evening as melatonin begins its own gentle rise. This gentle cooling following shortly after the warmth of the bath appears to help reinforce the body's own natural signal that night has arrived, supporting a smoother, more timely release of melatonin than might otherwise occur. Beyond this temperature effect, the simple stillness and quiet, often associated with a warm bath, may also support a gentle reduction in circulating cortisol, easing the nervous system further toward a calmer, more rest-ready state. This combination, a small physical relaxation paired with a subtle hormonal nudge, may help explain why a warm bath so often feels like an especially effective way to prepare for sleep, more than its simple physical comfort alone might suggest. You might consider this gently tonight, or on another evening soon, the understanding that warmth, however brief, followed by a slow return to coolness, is quietly working alongside your own body's chemistry, offering it one small, additional signal that the day is finally truly ready to rest. Spending just a few quiet minutes petting a familiar animal, a dog, a cat, or another trusted companion, has been shown in several studies to raise oxytocin levels not only in the person offering the affection, but in the animal receiving it as well. This mutual rise suggests that oxytocin's role in bonding is not limited strictly to human relationships, but extends more broadly to the quiet, trust-based connections formed between humans and animals as well. Researchers studying this effect have found that this response tends to be strongest between animals and people who already share an established familiar bond, much like the pattern observed in long-term human relationships, suggesting that familiarity itself continues to play a meaningful role, even across species. This shared hormonal response may help explain why spending time with a pet so often brings a genuine, noticeable sense of calm, one that feels emotionally real, precisely because it is chemically real as well, not simply imagined or exaggerated. Alongside this oxytocin rise, cortisol levels in both the person and the animal often ease slightly during this same quiet interaction, reinforcing a shared sense of calm experienced by both parties simultaneously. There is something quietly moving in this discovery, the understanding that connection and the gentle chemistry that supports it is not confined only to conversations between people, but can be shared just as genuinely between a person and an animal through nothing more than a few minutes of quiet, familiar, trusted closeness. The nervous, unsettled feeling, so commonly experienced before public speaking, is at its core largely a hormonal alarm, adrenaline and cortisol, rising together in anticipation of a moment the brain has identified as significant, even though no genuine physical danger is actually present. This response evolved originally to prepare the body for immediate physical action, and even now, it activates in much the same way when facing a room full of attentive faces, as it once did when facing genuine physical threats many generations ago. Heart rate increases, breathing quickens, and muscles tense slightly, all preparing a body that in this particular moment does not actually need to run or physically defend itself, but instead needs only to stand, speak, and be heard clearly. This mismatch between an ancient hormonal response and a distinctly modern situation is part of why public speaking can feel so disproportionately intense, the body reacting with a level of urgency the actual circumstances rarely require. Understanding this can offer a small, genuine kind of relief. That racing heart before stepping in front of an audience is not a sign of weakness or unpreparedness. It is simply an old, familiar system doing exactly what it has always done, readying the body for a moment it has judged, however incorrectly by modern standards, to be significant. With a little time and a few steady breaths, this same alarm tends to ease naturally, allowing the calmer, more capable part of the mind to step forward and speak. Standing within a crowd, sharing a genuinely exciting moment, a concert, a live sporting event, a significant shared announcement, appears to trigger a mild collective rise in dopamine among many of the people present, simultaneously a response researchers believe is reinforced partly through shared emotional expression and partly through simple social mirroring. Watching others around oneself react with visible excitement, cheering, applauding, smiling, appears to intensify a person's own dopamine response beyond what the same experience might produce if encountered entirely alone. This may help explain why watching an exciting moment surrounded by an enthusiastic crowd so often feels more intense, more memorable, than experiencing that exact same moment quietly and privately. The energy of the group in this sense is not simply a social phenomenon but a chemical one as well. Each person's own dopamine response, subtly amplified by the visible enthusiasm of those standing nearby. This effect appears to work in both directions as well, one person's excitement gently reinforcing another's, and that response, in turn reinforcing someone else's nearby, creating a small self-sustaining wave that moves quietly through an entire crowd. There is something quietly beautiful in recognizing this pattern. The understanding that joy in these particular moments is not experienced in complete isolation, even within a very large and largely unfamiliar crowd, but is instead gently shared, chemically reinforced, and subtly amplified simply by being surrounded by other people experiencing that same rising collective sense of excitement alongside you. Receiving difficult or upsetting news typically triggers a fairly immediate rise in cortisol, part of the body's broader stress response, preparing it to cope with unexpected hardship. Remarkably, research has shown that a simple, genuine hug from a trusted friend shortly after receiving such news can measurably soften this cortisol rise, blunting its intensity compared to facing that same difficult news entirely alone. This effect appears to work through the quiet opposing influence of oxytocin, which rises during comforting physical contact and appears capable of gently tempering the body's stress response, even while that stress is still actively unfolding. This does not mean the difficult news itself becomes any less real or significant, but rather that the body's physical experience of processing that news becomes somewhat gentler, somewhat more bearable, simply through the presence of trusted comfort nearby. This finding offers a small, meaningful insight into why comfort from others so often feels genuinely helpful during hard moments. Not simply as a kind gesture, but as something the body itself responds to directly, chemically, in real time. Perhaps you have experienced this yourself. Difficult news softened slightly, made a little more bearable simply by someone trusted stepping close and holding you steady for a moment. That softening was not only emotional, it was oxytocin, quietly working against cortisol in that very moment, offering the body a small, genuine measure of relief, precisely when it was needed most. Listening to slow, calming music, particularly music without lyrics or with a steady, unhurried tempo, has been shown to gently lower cortisol within a relatively short amount of time, often within around 15 to 20 minutes of consistent listening. Researchers believe this effect works through several combined pathways: a slowing of breathing that naturally follows a slower musical tempo, a general sense of familiarity and comfort associated with certain sounds, and a quieting of overall mental activity that tends to accompany focused, undistracted listening. This effect appears strongest with music a person already finds personally soothing, suggesting that individual preference and familiarity play a meaningful role, rather than any single type of music working identically for everyone. Interestingly, this cortisol-lowering effect has been observed even in fairly stressful settings, including hospital waiting rooms and pre-surgical environments where calming music has been used specifically to help ease patient anxiety before certain medical procedures. This suggests that the effect is not simply about comfort or preference, but reflects a genuine, measurable physiological response, one the body appears willing to offer, even in unfamiliar or difficult circumstances, provided the right kind of calming sound is present. There is something quietly hopeful in this. The understanding that something as simple and freely available as a favorite calming song carries real, measurable influence over the body's internal chemistry, gently easing stress, lowering cortisol, and offering a small, genuine sense of relief, often in far less time than one might expect. Expressing gratitude, whether through a spoken thank you, a written note, or simply a quiet moment of genuine appreciation, has been linked in several studies to measurable increases in oxytocin, both in the person expressing thanks and often in the person receiving it. This effect appears to work through the same underlying pathway responsible for oxytocin's broader role in bonding and trust. Since gratitude itself often reflects a genuine acknowledgement of connection between two people. Small kind gestures, more broadly holding a door, offering help unprompted, remembering a small detail about someone else's day, have shown similar effects, suggesting that oxytocin responds not only to physical closeness, but to genuine, intentional kindness as well, even when no touch is involved at all. This may help explain why small acts of kindness so often leave both people involved feeling slightly warmer, slightly more connected, even during otherwise ordinary, unremarkable moments. The effect does not require anything elaborate. A brief, sincere thank you appears sufficient to trigger this small, genuine chemical shift, reinforcing the relationship, however briefly, between the two people involved. There is something quietly worth carrying with you in this, the understanding that kindness offered, even in its smallest, simplest form, does not go unnoticed by the body itself, but is instead met with a small, genuine rise in the very same hormone responsible for trust and closeness, a quiet chemical. Thank you offered right back. Completing a task, particularly one that required sustained effort or attention, brings with it a small, genuine dopamine reward, released once the brain registers that a meaningful goal has finally been reached. This response tends to feel proportionate to the effort involved. A small task, bringing a brief, modest sense of satisfaction, while a larger, more demanding task often brings a correspondingly stronger and longer-lasting sense of accomplishment. Interestingly, this dopamine reward often arrives not only at the very end of a task, but in smaller amounts along the way as well, particularly at meaningful checkpoints that signal genuine progress is being made toward the larger goal. This is part of why breaking a large task into smaller, clearly defined steps often feels more manageable and even more rewarding than facing that same task as one large, undivided challenge, since each smaller step offers its own small opportunity for this same dopamine response to occur. This reward system likely evolved to encourage sustained effort toward meaningful goals, offering a small, genuine chemical incentive for persistence, patience, and follow-through. Perhaps you have felt this yourself recently, a quiet, satisfying ease settling in after finally finishing something that required real effort, small or large. That ease is not simply relief. It is dopamine, offering its own small, genuine reward, a quiet acknowledgement from within that effort once again has carried something all the way through to its completion. A craving for something sweet, arriving late in the evening, even after a satisfying dinner, often traces back to natural shifts occurring within the body's appetite-regulating hormones as the day comes to a close. As cortisol gradually declines in the evening, and the body begins preparing for rest, blood sugar regulation can shift slightly as well, sometimes creating a temporary dip that the brain interprets as a mild need for quick, accessible energy, often expressed as a craving for something sweet. This tendency can be further reinforced by simple, accumulated tiredness, since decision-making around food tends to become somewhat less deliberate as mental fatigue builds throughout a long day, making sweeter, more immediately rewarding foods feel especially appealing in that particular moment. This does not mean an evening craving reflects any genuine physical necessity, but rather a fairly ordinary, predictable hormonal pattern many people experience in some form. Recognizing this pattern can offer a small, useful bit of reassurance, understanding that a late evening craving is not a personal failing, but simply the body responding honestly to its own shifting internal chemistry as the day winds down. There is something gently worth noticing here as well. A reminder that even small, ordinary cravings carry a quiet hormonal story behind them. Evening light fading, cortisol easing, blood sugar shifting just slightly, the body simply asking in its own familiar way for a small measure of comfort as the day finally begins, drawing to its close. Exposure to cold weather can nudge the thyroid gland to slightly increase its hormone output, encouraging the body's cells to generate a bit more internal heat than they would under warmer conditions. This adjustment happens gradually, rather than suddenly, since thyroid hormone itself tends to remain active in the bloodstream for several days, meaning the body's response to sustained cold builds progressively over repeated exposure, rather than shifting instantly with a single chilly moment. This increased thyroid activity raises what is sometimes called the body's metabolic rate, essentially the speed at which cells convert stored energy into usable heat, helping maintain a stable internal temperature, even as the surrounding environment grows considerably colder. This may help explain why appetite sometimes increases slightly during colder months, since a body working harder to generate internal heat may require a modest increase in available energy to sustain that additional effort. This response reflects a broader pattern seen throughout the hormonal system, a gradual, proportionate adjustment made quietly in response to a genuine environmental need, rather than a dramatic, sudden shift. The body in this sense is not simply enduring cold weather passively. It is actively adjusting its own internal chemistry to meet the moment, thyroid hormone quietly rising just enough to help maintain warmth, working steadily in the background through even the coldest, quietest stretch of winter. Traveling across several time zones does not simply confuse a person's sense of time. It asks nearly every hormone rhythm in the body to gradually resynchronize itself, entirely adjusting not just one signal, but an entire coordinated system built around the previous location's pattern of light and darkness. Cortisol must find a new morning peak. Melatonin must learn to rise at a new appropriate hour. And even smaller rhythms, such as those governing appetite and body temperature, must gradually shift as well, each adjusting at its own particular pace rather than all realigning simultaneously. This is part of why the effects of significant time zone changes can feel uneven. Certain symptoms like difficulty sleeping, easing within a few days, while others, like appetite, irregularity, or subtle mood shifts, may linger somewhat longer before fully resolving. The body approaches this challenge patiently, rather than urgently, adjusting a small amount each day, rather than attempting a single dramatic correction, since a gradual layered system such as this generally resists sudden forced change. Exposure to natural daylight at the new location plays an especially important role throughout this process, offering the clearest, most reliable signal the body can use to guide its own recalibration forward. There is something quietly patient in this process, a reminder that even something as disorienting as jet lag reflects not confusion but careful, deliberate work, an entire internal system, thoughtfully and methodically finding its way back into balance, one small, steady adjustment at a time. Even a brief, warm greeting exchanged between two strangers, a genuine smile, a friendly hello, a small moment of kindness shown to someone previously unknown, has been shown in research to produce a subtle, measurable shift in oxytocin for both people involved, even without any lasting relationship formed afterward. This suggests that oxytocin's influence is not reserved exclusively for close, established relationships, but can be gently activated even by brief, sincere interactions between people who may never cross paths again. This small shift tends to be modest compared to the stronger response seen between close friends or family. Yet it remains genuinely measurable, offering a small, real sense of warmth, even within an otherwise fleeting, ordinary encounter. This may help explain why small, kind interactions with strangers, a friendly exchange with someone at a shop, a brief, kind word from someone unfamiliar, so often leave a slightly warmer impression than their brevity alone would seem to justify. The body, it seems, does not require deep familiarity in order to respond kindly to kindness itself. Perhaps you have experienced this yourself. A small, unexpected warmth following a brief, friendly exchange with someone you had never met before and may never meet again. That small warmth was genuine chemical and real oxytocin responding quietly, even briefly, to the simple, ordinary presence of one person choosing kindness toward another. The anxious anticipation so often felt before an important exam draws on precisely the same hormonal alarm system the body would use in the presence of genuine physical danger. Adrenaline and cortisol, rising together in preparation for a challenge the brain has identified as significant even though no physical threat is actually present in the room. This shared chemistry helps explain why exam anxiety can feel so intensely physical. A racing heart, tense shoulders, a restless stomach, sensations that mirror genuine fear far more closely than the situation itself, sitting quietly at a desk, would seem to warrant. This response evolved originally to prepare the body for immediate physical action, and it has not yet fully adapted to modern challenges that require calm, focused thinking rather than urgent physical movement, which is part of why this particular kind of stress can sometimes work against performance rather than supporting it. Recognizing this mismatch can offer a small, genuine kind of reassurance. Understanding that racing heart and unsettled stomach are not evidence of being unprepared, but simply an old, familiar alarm system, responding the only way it fully knows how. With a few slow, deliberate breaths, this same response tends to ease gradually, allowing cortisol and adrenaline to settle back toward a more manageable level, gradually making room for calmer, clearer thinking to step forward in their place exactly when it is needed most. Crying, particularly during genuine emotional release rather than physical irritation, is often followed by a hormonal shift that leaves many people feeling noticeably calmer once the tears themselves have finally subsided. Researchers believe this calming aftermath is connected to a gradual easing of cortisol, following the emotional peak that originally triggered the tears, alongside a modest rise in endorphins, which may help explain the sense of quiet relief so often described immediately afterward. This means crying, though frequently viewed as simply a sign of distress, may actually represent part of the body's own natural process for resolving that distress, a physical release that helps carry built-up tension toward a genuine, measurable state of calm. This does not happen instantly. The full calming effect typically unfolds gradually over the minutes following a good cry, rather than the moment tears themselves begin. This may help explain why people so often describe feeling emotionally lighter, even physically lighter, after crying deeply about something significant, a heavy hormonal weight quietly easing alongside the tears themselves. Considered this way, crying becomes less something to feel embarrassed about, and more something the body offers itself deliberately, a built-in mechanism for gently working through difficulty. Perhaps you have felt this yourself, tears giving way slowly to a strange, unexpected stillness. That stillness was not imagined. It was the body quietly settling itself back toward calm, exactly the way it has always known how. A full, uninterrupted night of sleep allows the body to properly reset its cortisol rhythm, easing it down to its lowest overnight point before allowing it to rise again naturally with the following morning. This nightly reset is essential, since cortisol that remains even mildly elevated overnight due to stress, poor sleep, or an irregular schedule, can gradually shift the entire rhythm slightly out of balance, making the following day's natural morning rise feel less distinct, and sometimes leaving a lingering sense of tiredness that a full night's rest would ordinarily prevent. During deep restorative sleep stages, cortisol tends to remain at its most stable and lowest levels, allowing the body's other repair processes, including the release of growth hormone, to proceed without interference from this particular stress-related hormone. This is part of why consistently poor sleep can gradually affect far more than simple daytime alertness, since cortisol imbalance tends to ripple outward, subtly influencing appetite, mood, and even long-term metabolic health if the pattern continues over an extended period. A single restful night, though, appears sufficient to meaningfully ease this rhythm back toward its proper balance, offering the body a genuine, measurable reset rather than merely a subjective sense of feeling more rested. There is something quietly reassuring in this, the understanding that sleep is not simply rest in a general sense, but an active, essential process, one the body relies on specifically to recalibrate its own delicate hormonal balance, gently, faithfully, every single night. Singing together in a group, whether in a formal choir or simply an informal gathering of friends, has been shown in research to raise oxytocin levels among the participants, an effect that appears considerably stronger than singing the very same song alone. Researchers believe this heightened response comes from the combination of shared rhythm, synchronized breathing, and genuine social connection that group singing naturally encourages each element, reinforcing the others throughout the shared experience. This synchronized quality seems particularly important since singing together requires a kind of shared timing and attentiveness that closely mirrors the same social attunement associated with oxytocin release in other close relationships. This may help explain why group singing has remained such a consistent part of human culture across so many different societies and traditions throughout history, not simply for its musical value, but for the genuine sense of closeness, belonging it appears to chemically reinforce among those participating together. Interestingly, this effect has been observed even among people who did not know each other particularly well beforehand, suggesting that the shared act itself, rather than prior familiarity alone, plays a meaningful role in triggering this particular response. There is something quietly moving in recognizing this, the understanding that voices joined together in song are not simply creating something beautiful to hear, but are also quietly and chemically drawing the people producing that sound a little closer together, one shared note, one shared breath at a time. Hearing the voice of someone trusted and familiar even over the phone without any physical presence or contact involved at all has been shown in research to measurably lower stress hormones in the listener, particularly when that voice carries a calm, warm, and genuinely comforting tone. This effect appears to work partly through oxytocin, which can rise in response to a familiar, comforting voice alone, even in the complete absence of physical touch, suggesting that closeness itself, rather than physical contact, specifically plays the more essential role in triggering this particular response. This finding may help explain why a phone call from someone trusted during a difficult or lonely moment so often brings genuine relief, not simply because of what is said, but because of the voice itself, familiar and warm, offering the nervous system a real physiological signal of safety and connection. Interestingly, this effect appears considerably weaker with text-based communication compared to an actual spoken voice, suggesting that tone, rhythm, and the simple sound of another person speaking carry a particular kind of comfort that written words alone cannot fully replicate. Perhaps you have experienced this yourself, a difficult day made gently easier simply by hearing a familiar voice on the other end of a call. That ease was not imagined. It was real, measurable oxytocin quietly rising, cortisol quietly easing, simply because someone trusted chose in that particular moment to speak, and you were there quietly to listen. Deep, slow, deliberate breathing works directly on the branch of the nervous system, most closely tied to the body's hormonal alarm response, gently calming the very same pathway responsible for releasing adrenaline and cortisol during moments of stress. When breathing slows and deepens, particularly when the exhale is extended slightly longer than the inhale, the vagus nerve becomes more active, sending a clear physiological signal that encourages the body to ease out of alertness and settle gradually back toward a calmer, more regulated state. This response does not require complicated technique or extensive practice to begin working. Even a few slow, deliberate breaths taken with genuine attention have been shown to produce a measurable easing of circulating stress hormones within just a few minutes. This makes deep breathing one of the most accessible tools available for gently influencing the body's own internal chemistry, requiring nothing beyond a few moments of quiet attention and a willingness to slow down even briefly in the middle of an otherwise busy or difficult day. Considered this way, something as ordinary and automatic as breathing becomes in these deliberate moments, a genuine form of quiet influence over the body's own hormonal state. You are in this very moment breathing slowly already simply by following along with these words. That alone may be gently easing something within you right now. Cortisol and adrenaline, both quietly softening, one slow, unhurried breath at a time. Watching a sunset in quiet stillness without distraction, without rushing toward the next task, can gently ease the body's daytime hormone rhythm, supporting a smoother, more natural transition from the alertness of daytime toward the calmer chemistry associated with evening. As natural light gradually dims during a sunset, the body receives a clear, unhurried signal that day is drawing to a close. A signal that appears to support cortisol's own natural evening decline, while gently preparing the pathway melatonin will soon follow later that night. This effect seems to depend meaningfully on stillness itself, a few unhurried minutes spent simply watching light change, rather than glancing briefly at a sunset while remaining otherwise occupied or distracted. This quiet attention appears to allow the body's own natural rhythm to align more closely with the rhythm already unfolding in the sky above, gradual, unhurried, softening slowly rather than shifting abruptly. This may help explain why watching a sunset so often brings a genuine sense of calm that feels disproportionate to something as simple as changing light, a calm that is emotional, certainly, but also quietly chemical as well. If you have ever paused, even briefly, to watch a sky shift slowly toward evening, you may have felt this yourself, a quiet easing settling in alongside the fading light. That ease was real, your own body's rhythm, gently following the skies, both moving together patiently toward rest. Sharing a meal among trusted, familiar people appears to quietly support healthier digestion-related hormone balance compared to eating that same meal alone, particularly during moments of stress or worry. This effect is connected partly to oxytocin, which tends to rise gently during shared comfortable meals, and which appears capable of easing the body's stress response enough to allow digestive hormones, including insulin, to function somewhat more smoothly and predictably. When the body remains in a heightened, stressed state, even mildly, digestion itself tends to slow, and hormone release related to digestion can become somewhat less efficient. Part of the body's broader instinct to prioritize alertness over digestion during moments it perceives as demanding. A calm, trusted meal shared among familiar company appears to ease this tension considerably, allowing digestion to proceed more smoothly, supported by a nervous system that feels genuinely safe and unhurried in that particular moment. This may help explain why meals shared with trusted company so often feel more satisfying and are sometimes even remembered as easier on the stomach compared to a similar meal eaten quickly alone or during a stressful moment. There is something quietly meaningful in this, the understanding that a shared table is never only about the food itself, but about the calm, trusted presence surrounding it as well, a presence the body notices and quietly responds to, in its own patient chemical way. The particular feeling of truly, deeply feeling safe in the presence of another person, a feeling many people recognize immediately but rarely think to explain, is in part an oxytocin-driven state, one built gradually through repeated closeness, trust, and consistent caring presence over time. This sense of safety does not typically arrive quickly or all at once, but develops slowly, through repeated small moments, shared time, consistent kindness, honest presence offered again and again, each one contributing gradually to a rising baseline of trust between two people. Once that trust is well established, oxytocin appears to rise more readily and more reliably in that particular relationship, reinforcing the sense of safety further, creating a kind of gentle, self-sustaining cycle between trust and chemistry, each one quietly strengthening the other over time. This may help explain why certain relationships feel distinctly calming in a way that is difficult to fully put into words. A felt sense of ease that is emotional, certainly, but also genuinely rooted in the body's own steady chemistry. If there is someone in your life who brings this particular kind of calm simply by being nearby, know that this feeling is not only in your mind. It lives quietly within your own biology as well, built patiently over time, one shared moment after another, until safety itself became something your body could recognize and trust, almost the moment that person walked back into the room. As evening settles quietly around you now, somewhere deep within your brain, a small gland, no larger than a grain of rice, has already begun its familiar work, releasing melatonin gently into your bloodstream, a quiet invitation, rather than a command extended softly toward rest. This rise does not happen suddenly. It builds slowly, gradually, following the fading light outside, or even the dimming light around you now, wherever you happen to be resting this evening. You do not need to do anything to help this process along. It is already happening quietly, faithfully, the way it has every single evening of your life, whether you have noticed it or not. Your body temperature is likely beginning to ease downward as well, ever so slightly. A small physical companion to this same rising hormone, both moving together toward the same gentle destination. There is nothing to force here, nothing to manage. Melatonin does not ask for effort. It simply asks for permission, a willingness to let the day soften, to let your eyes grow heavy, to let your thoughts slow their pace just slightly. If you are listening to this while lying comfortably, know that your own body is already meeting you here, already beginning this same quiet transition. It begins every night, patiently, reliably, without needing to be told. You may simply let it continue undisturbed, exactly as it already knows, how carrying you gently, gradually, toward the rest that is already waiting for you. Right now, as this evening continues to unfold around you, cortisol, the hormone that helped carry you through the busyness of your day, is quietly stepping back, easing lower with each passing hour, softening the body's readiness for whatever comes next. You do not need to ask it to slow down. It already knows to. This gentle decline has been happening every evening of your life, a steady, reliable rhythm your body maintains entirely on its own, regardless of how demanding or ordinary your day may have been. Whatever alertness carried you through today's tasks and conversations is simply no longer needed now, and cortisol, sensing this, begins loosening its hold, allowing your body a little more room to soften, to settle, to rest. You might notice this yourself even now, a subtle heaviness in your limbs, a slower rhythm to your breathing, a mind that feels just slightly less urgent than it did only a few hours ago. That shift is real, and it is entirely yours, already unfolding gently within you, without needing to be summoned or encouraged. There is nothing left to prove tonight, nothing left to accomplish. Cortisol understands this. Even if your thoughts have not quite caught up yet, and it is already easing accordingly, quietly making space for calmer, slower chemistry to take its place. You may simply allow this to continue, trusting that your body has already begun the process of letting today go. Very soon, if you allow yourself to drift towards sleep tonight, your body will begin one of its most important nightly tasks, releasing its largest pulse of growth hormone, quietly working to repair whatever today may have gently worn down within you. This does not require any effort from you at all. You will not need to instruct your body to begin this work. It happens automatically, faithfully. The moment you slip into deep, restful sleep, an internal kindness, your body offers itself every single night, without exception. Small aches from today, quiet fatigue in your muscles, the countless minor repairs your body handles continuously without your awareness, will all receive attention tonight, patiently while you rest. You are not idle during this time, even though it may feel that way. Your body is quietly busy rebuilding, restoring, tending gently to whatever needs care. All you need to offer in return is the rest itself, uninterrupted, unhurried, simply allowing your eyes to close and your breathing to slow. There is nothing to prepare, nothing to organize, nothing left to think through tonight. Your body already knows exactly what to do once sleep arrives. And it will do this same quiet work whether or not you remain awake to think about it. So let yourself rest now, trusting that somewhere within you tonight, your own body is already preparing to take gentle, careful care of you. If you were to place a hand gently over your own heart tonight, you might notice its rhythm slowing, softening, settling into something calmer than it held only a few hours earlier. This slower heartbeat reflects several hormones quietly stepping back together, adrenaline and cortisol both easing their hold, allowing your heart the freedom to finally slow its pace and rest alongside the rest of you. You do not need to consciously slow your own heartbeat. It is already happening gently on its own, guided by chemistry that has been quietly shifting since the moment evening began. Each slower beat is in its own small way a quiet signal that your body feels safe enough now to ease its guard, safe enough to trust that nothing urgent remains to be handled tonight. This is one of the clearest, most physical reminders that rest is not something you need to force. It is something your body naturally moves toward the moment it senses permission to do so. Your heartbeat tonight is simply following that same quiet permission. Slower, now, steadier, settling gently into the rhythm of rest, rather than the rhythm of the day now finally behind you. You may let this continue exactly as it is without needing to notice it consciously, trusting that this slower, steadier rhythm is simply your own body quietly and faithfully beginning to rest. Wherever you are resting right now, if the room around you has grown dim, or if you have closed your eyes to listen more closely, know that this darkness itself is speaking quietly to your body, offering a simple, trusted signal that it is now safe to rest. Your body has relied on this particular signal for as long as human bodies have existed. Darkness meaning safety, meaning stillness, meaning permission to finally set down whatever alertness the daylight required. You do not need to interpret this signal consciously. Your body already understands it, immediately, instinctively, responding with small, quiet shifts throughout your entire hormonal system the moment true darkness settles in around you. This is part of why closing your eyes even briefly, even before sleep fully arrives, can already begin easing you gently toward rest, since your body does not require complete darkness to begin recognizing this familiar, comforting signal. If you allow the space around you to remain dim and undisturbed tonight, you are offering your body exactly what it already knows how to use well. A clear, unhurried invitation to finally let go of today. There is nothing more required of you than this simple stillness, this quiet darkness gently surrounding you now. Your body will take care of the rest exactly as it always has, trusting the darkness the same way it has trusted it every single night before this one. As your thoughts begin to slow tonight, gently drifting rather than rushing from one place to another, you are offering your body something genuinely valuable. A calm mind that allows stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline to finally settle quietly into the background no longer needed to carry you through anything urgent. You do not need to empty your mind completely. Even a gentle softening of your thoughts, a slower, less hurried quality to whatever passes through your awareness right now, is often enough to support this same quiet chemical shift within you. Your body is listening closely to your mind's own rhythm, and a calmer mind offers it welcome permission to ease further, to trust more fully that rest right now is exactly what is needed. If a thought arises about tomorrow, you may simply let it pass gently by without needing to hold on to it tonight. Tomorrow will still be there waiting patiently whenever you are ready to meet it again. Tonight belongs only to rest. As your mind continues to settle softly, unhurriedly, know that your body is settling right alongside it. Stress hormones easing further into stillness, making room for calmer, gentler chemistry to take their place. You do not need to do anything more than allow this, gently, patiently trusting that a quiet mind and a quiet body are tonight moving softly toward the very same rest. Throughout these quiet nighttime hours now settling around you, your body is gently using this time to restore whatever today may have gradually used energy, replenished tissues, repaired small imbalances, quietly corrected, all while you simply rest. This restoration does not require your attention or effort. It unfolds entirely on its own, guided by hormones that already know precisely what your body needs, tonight working steadily in the background, while your mind is finally free to let go. You have carried yourself through an entire day, through tasks and thoughts and countless small moments, and now quietly, your body is returning the favor, tending to you in return. There is something worth resting in, quite literally, within that simple exchange. You do not need to earn this care, and you do not need to supervise it either. It is already happening patiently, faithfully, the same way it has every night of your life, whether or not you have ever paused to notice it before tonight. As you continue resting now, know that you are not simply passing time. You are allowing something quietly essential to take place within you. A slow, careful restoration that only happens when you finally allow yourself to stop, to soften, to rest completely. Let your body continue this work exactly as it needs to tonight, undisturbed, cared for gently and completely. If today brought you any small moment of closeness, a kind word, a warm exchange, a quiet comfort shared with someone else, know that oxytocin from that moment may still be lingering gently within you, now quietly easing your body toward the round, slower rhythm it is settling into tonight. This lingering effect does not require closeness to have happened recently. Even a small kindness from earlier today may still be offering your body quiet support, a soft, steady presence woven gently into tonight's rest. You are not separate from the connections you carry, even in this quiet, solitary moment. Somewhere within you, that warmth remains chemically present, gently reinforcing the calm you are settling into right now. If it feels helpful, you might allow yourself to recall softly one small moment of genuine warmth from today or from any day, and simply let that memory rest alongside you here. Your body may respond to that quiet memory with its own small familiar comfort, oxytocin rising gently once more, easing you further toward rest. You do not need anyone beside you right now for this warmth to remain real. It already lives within you, quietly present, gently supporting you as you continue settling now toward sleep, carried softly by every small, honest moment of closeness you have ever known. As the night continues to deepen around you now, something quietly remarkable is unfolding within your own body. Serotonin gradually converting into melatonin, one hormone gently transforming into another, precisely timed to guide you toward deeper, more complete rest. This transformation happens automatically, a natural chemical process your body has carried out every single night of your life, converting the same hormone that supported your calm, steady mood throughout the day into the very hormone now guiding you gently towards sleep. You do not need to understand this process for it to continue working exactly as it should. It is already happening quietly, faithfully, somewhere deep within you right now as you continue resting. There is something quietly beautiful in this particular shift, the understanding that calm and rest are not separate experiences, but closely connected, one gently becoming the other as the night continues to unfold. Whatever steadiness carried you gently through today is now being carried forward into tonight's rest, transformed softly into something new, something quieter, something built specifically to help you finally let go. You may simply continue resting now, trusting that this quiet transformation is already well underway within you. One hormone becoming another one, steady rhythm continuing into the next, carrying you gently, faithfully toward the deep, restorative sleep that is already waiting closely nearby. Every hormone we have spoken of tonight, each one so small, so quiet, so easily overlooked during the busyness of an ordinary day, is in this particular moment working together toward the very same gentle purpose, allowing your body finally, completely to rest. Cortisol has eased. Melatonin has risen. Oxytocin lingers softly nearby. Growth hormone waits patiently for deep sleep to begin its quiet repair. None of them are working against you tonight. Each one in its own time, in its own particular way, is gently supporting the very same outcome, a body finally allowed to soften, to slow, to let go of everything the day required of it. You do not need to manage any of this. You never have. Your body has always known exactly how to carry you gently toward rest, the same way it is doing right now, quietly, faithfully, without needing your conscious attention at all. All that is asked of you tonight is what has always been asked, simply allowing yourself to rest, trusting the same quiet chemistry that has carried you safely through every night before this one. So let yourself settle now completely, knowing that every small, invisible process within you is already working gently on your behalf, exactly as it should, exactly as it always has, carrying you softly, faithfully toward the rest you have fully earned tonight. Thank you for spending this time here with me. Until next time, good night.